Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Feel free and relax. I moved into this old building about 2 months ago. The rent is low and I like that it is in the center of town. I thought it would be convenient. I didn't pay much attention to the creaking floors or the dim lighting in the hallway. At first it seemed like a normal place that was a bit shabby, maybe just needed a little care, but from the first week, something was wrong. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just my anxiety, but every night around midnight or a little later I had the feeling like there was someone in the hallway. It didn't start right away. The first week I was busy unpacking, organizing, and starting a new job. I barely had time to notice anything strange, but by the second week I started hearing those footsteps. I remember the first time it happened, around 12:30 a.m., I was lying on my little couch, flipping through the channels on. I heard a slow steady noise outside the door. It was very faint but it sounded like actual footsteps. There was a pause, then a splash, then another pause, then another splash. It reminded me of someone. That person was trying to walk without making any noise except the floor in the hallway was too old to do that. The wood cracked under any pressure. At first I thought it might be a neighbor working late or something. I got up, opened the door to see who it was and saw no one. The hallway light was on but the place was empty. I walked a few steps outside, nothing. I shrugged and closed the door. I told myself the floor was probably just moving or something. Old buildings make weird noises. I went back to the couch and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The next night, I heard the same thing. But this time, it started after 1 a.m. Same pattern, slow careful footsteps as if someone was moving down the hall. I went to the door, opened faster this time, hoping to catch whoever it was. Again nothing, no one in the hall. I felt cold. But I wasn't about to panic. I never believed in ghosts or anything like that. I assumed it was old wood or maybe someone upstairs. The sound can travel to older buildings and it can still play pranks on you. It's weird. I almost didn't want to tell anyone about. 'Cause I knew what it would sound like. Paranoid. On the third night I started getting annoyed. It happened consistently, always after midnight, but not quite at the same time. Sometimes 12:5:15, sometimes sometimes after that. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, waiting the hall for quite a while, and I live near the end of the hall, so whoever was walking or whatever was making noise was moving the length of the hall. I kept imagining someone walking again, looking for the door number or some random occupant stumbling around, but the building was never busy at that hour. I heard no other noises except slow footsteps and the occasional old floorboard clatter. My heart started pounding. I stood up and pressed my ear to the door. The footsteps continued to get closer, then stopped closer. My apartment would be silent for a few seconds, then they would retreat the same way they came. It felt like a strange game, but every time I opened the door I saw no one. One night I decided I would be a little more methodical about this. I turned off all the lights in the house, sat in the dark and waited. I occasionally checked the time on my phone. Around 12:40 when I heard the footsteps, softer at first, as if at the end of the hallway near the stairs leading to the foyer. They got louder, or maybe just more distinct as they came closer. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear each creak move on the old boards. My heart was pounding loud. I could barely hear what was going on. My palms were sweating. I took slow breaths to calm down. Then the footsteps came to my door. They stopped. Felt this overwhelming tension in my chest, like I was holding my breath even though I was trying not to. For a split second I didn't even blink. I expected a knock. Nothing came. I thought maybe I could see a shadow under the door, so I turned off the light in the small entryway behind me to see if there was any movement, but it was too dark in that hallway for me to see anything. The door has a tiny peephole though, so I moved my eye up to it. I looked out. The corridor light was on, but I didn't see anything. No figure, no shadow. It was just empty. Then after maybe 5 or 10 seconds I heard the steps again, going back the way they came. It was the exact reverse, a slow steady sequence of soft creaks moving away from me back toward the staircase. I pressed my ear to the door again. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I listened until the steps faded out. It was like they disappeared into the far end of the hallway. I stood there feeling my heart pound. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, opened the door a crack and peered out. Empty hallway, lights buzzing faintly, no people, no movement. I stepped out for a second, listening. Nothing. The only thing I could hear was a faint hum from the elevator at the other end. After a minute I gave up. I went back and locked the door and tried to sleep. I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me sit up. It was well past 2 By AM when I finally drifted off and the next morning I felt exhausted. The routine continued for a while. Some nights I'd go to bed early hoping I'd sleep through whatever was happening. I'd wake up around midnight or 1 AM anyway, started by a dream or some small noise. Then I'd wait and sure enough the footsteps would return. At times I considered the possibility that I was half asleep and imagining things, but it felt too real. I could feel the boards vibrating under someone's weight. I decided to ask around. The first person I talked to was the manager, an older guy named Richard. He had a small office down in the lobby. I casually mentioned that I heard noises at night. He shrugged and said it's an old place, the pipes bang, the wood expands, all that stuff. I nodded and said maybe that was it. I also spoke briefly with a neighbor who lived at the other end of the hallway. He was a quiet middle-aged guy with a slight limp. I asked if he ever heard anything weird at night. He shook his head and said he usually slept like a rock. He didn't seem suspicious or anything. I tried to bring it up with a few other residents I met in the elevator, but most of them just smiled politely and changed the subject. It felt silly to push the topic. One night I thought about setting up some kind of recording device. I had an old phone that I didn't use anymore. I thought maybe I could leave it in the hallway on record and see what I caught, but I didn't want someone stepping on it or stealing it. I also worried I'd come off as some paranoid person if I got caught messing around in the corridor that late. I ended up not doing it, which regret. Maybe I could have gotten proof of something instead. I kept relying on my own observations. The noises started to get more frequent. Where it used to be a few times a week, it now happened almost every night. Sometimes I even heard them around 2 or 3 now in the morning. It was always the same pattern: slow steps from the far end, a pause by my door, then a return trip. I never heard any doors opening or closing. It was weird. I wondered if it could be some neighbor who got locked out or a person with insomnia pacing the hallway, but it never made sense that they'd stop right by my door, and I couldn't figure out why I never caught them in the ACT. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. I'd lay in bed staring at the ceiling waiting. My body would tense up at the slightest sound. During the day I felt silly, but at night it was a different story. My pulse would race and I'd sweat a lot. My apartment wasn't hot, but my body acted like I was in a sauna. Some nights I just watched TV until 2 AM with the low volume waiting for the footsteps. They always came. One particular night was the worst. It was late, around 1:30 AM, and I was leaning against the door again trying to catch anything unusual. My ear was pressed against the wood. I heard the steps start up at the far end. They got louder and I felt my heart pounding. There was a faint squeak, then another. Each one matched the shift in weight. It sounded like a person wearing shoes with a hard sole taking gentle deliberate steps. It wasn't random. They reached my door. I held my breath for a split second. I thought I heard breathing on the other side, but I couldn't be sure. My body locked up, my fingers tingled. Then there was silence. After a moment the footsteps started moving back. When they were gone I realized I was shaking. I looked through the peephole. No one. That was the night I decided to sit down on the floor right by the door. I just sat there leaning against the wood trying to calm down. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mind ran through a list of explanations. Maybe it was some neighbor who had a habit of sleepwalking, or maybe the wooden floors in the building were moving due to the heating ducts at odd hours. I tried to make sense of it, but it just happened, and always same route, always same time frame, always stopped in front of my door. The manager kept telling me the same thing every time I mentioned old floors, old pipes. He seemed bored with me. I thought he saw I was upset. I didn't feel like he was hiding anything, just that he thought it wasn't a problem. My limping neighbor just said that didn't hear anything and changed the subject a few times. I thought I saw someone lingering on the stairs when I left for work in the morning, but it turned out to be another tenant waiting for my car. Never caught anyone suspecting. It was frustrating. As the weeks went by I became so restless that everything noises all the time. I get nervous. If the fridge clicks I freeze. If a car honks outside I shiver. My body feels like it's on constant alert. I'm getting dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. People at work ask if I'm okay. I say I'm just busy. I don't want to look crazy. Then one weekend I thought maybe I might catch someone by surprise if I'm in the hallway, so around midnight I turned off the lights in my apartment, opened the door very gently and walked into the hallway. I left the door open behind me. The hallway lights were on, but they were dim and flickered sometimes. I walked to the end where the stairs were. No one was there. I crouched down next to the wall trying to stay still. The building was quiet. I heard the elevator go a few times, but no one came down to my floor. After about an hour I couldn't take it anymore. My legs were cramping and I felt ridiculous. I went back inside. Of course that was the only night the footsteps didn't happen. I guess if It was someone they noticed me somehow, or it was all random timing. I didn't try again. I finally got to the point where I tried to ignore it. If I heard footsteps I would lie in bed and let them pass, but ignoring it didn't help, actually made me more anxious. I kept imagining someone standing on the other side of the door staring at me. The thought sent shivers down my spine. I started shaking under the covers. Sometimes I got up and double-checked the lock. I never slept well. One night around 12:50 a.m. I heard the footsteps start. I had to stay in bed. They moved slowly down the hallway. Like always, I was sweating so much I had to push the covers off. My heart was pounding. When the footsteps reached the door they stopped. I could almost feel someone's presence through the door, as if I had opened it. They would be right there. I listened almost breathless. My mouth went dry for a few seconds. Then the footsteps moved further away from me. Heard them fade. The hallway became quiet. I didn't get up to check. I just lay there until morning, dozed off in a restless dream, and it just kept going. While the footsteps didn't lead to anything else, they never tried to open my door. They never knocked. They never whispered or shook anything. I just heard them come and go. No one else seemed to notice or care. I couldn't think of a logical explanation, but I also couldn't prove anything spooky was going on. I started to wonder if there was some weirdo neighbor who had a reason to be walking around at those hours. Maybe an elderly person with insomnia trying to move. Maybe the building's heating system was making the wood crack in a series of footsteps-like sounds. Maybe someone who had liked to creep around at night. I still live here. I keep telling myself it's nothing, but every time I hear that sound I tense up like I'm waiting for something bad to happen out. Even though nothing happened, just footsteps coming and going night after night. Stopped in front of my door. It's been weeks since the last time, but I'm not relieved. I feel like it's only a matter of time before it starts again. I never found any clues in the hallway. I checked for scratches or footprints on the old tiles. Nothing unusual. I knocked on a few neighbors' doors before just to ask if they ever heard anything. No one admitted. I tried to tell myself maybe I'm the only one bothered by these sounds since my apartment is near the end of the hallway. Maybe the acoustics there are weird. All I know is it's real enough to make my heart beat fast when I hear it. I have no solid explanation. It could be a neighbor, it could be the floor, it could be a combination of things too. Or someone who is perfectly normal just acting weird, but that doesn't stop me from feeling uneasy. That long hallway, the dim lights, and the series of footsteps in the dead of night. It's hard not to freak out when I talk about it. People tend to ignore it, but if they go through it, they themselves can understand. I've thought about moving, but financially this place still makes sense to me. The rent is cheap and close to work, plus I keep thinking if I leave I'll always wonder what the hell is actually going on in that hallway right now. I'll deal with that. I always lock my door. I try to drown out the noise with a fan or some music. When I'm in bed sometimes I wear earplugs, but on quiet nights I can still hear those footsteps. Nothing dramatic about it, just footsteps in an old building that come and go with no explanation, and honestly that alone is enough to drive me crazy. That's the whole story. I wish I had a big reveal, some evidence that it was a prank or there was a hidden passage in the walls, but I don't know. All I have is the memory of sitting there pressed against my door, hearing slow, cautious footsteps on the other side just inches away, not knowing who or what they belonged to. And then it happened. I heard it, I felt it, and I never understood it. I'm not saying it was supernatural, but late at night when my mind is racing I can't help but imagine someone standing there in the darkness of the old hallway listening to me breathe on the other side of the door only to disappear. When I look back it still makes my heart pound just thinking about it. I still remember that last night at the hotel. My body was exhausted and mind was half off, but I couldn't fall asleep really. The room was too quiet, the bed felt too hard, the air conditioner was a little noisy, and every time it turned on I'd startle awake because I felt like something was wrong. I was in that little city for a few days. Some work was in order and the place was nothing fancy, just a decent hotel on a busy street, people coming and going at all hours, but it was quieter than I was used to. Around midnight I decided to force myself to sleep. I put my phone on vibrate, plugged it into the nightstand, and rolled over hoping to get enough rest before checking out in the morning. I had no idea what the night would be like. I fell asleep at some point but didn't relax. I kept looking at the clock on the nightstand. 1 a.m. then 2 a.m. Every little noise got louder in that strange room. I heard the elevator ding in the hallway or someone's hoarse cough in the other room, and my brain refused to relax. Around 3 a.m. in the morning I was in that weird half-asleep state where you are aware of the darkness but not fully aware of your thoughts. That's When my cell phone started to vibrate, it wasn't just a vibration, it was the whole vibration of an incoming call. I forced myself to open my eyes and reach across the screen. The whole room lit up. It felt blinding. The number wasn't in my contacts. Part of me thought it might be a family member or a friend calling urgently, because who else was calling at 3 o'clock in the morning? My pulse was racing. But something was wrong, so I ignored it. I didn't answer. I waited for it to stop. Finally the buzzing stopped. I put the phone face down. Nightstand, closes eyes and tries to slow my breathing. My heart is pounding, probably out of surprise more than anything else. I tell myself it's an unknown number, maybe it's a drunk or someone in a different time zone. I adjust the blanket around me hoping it won't ring again, but it doesn't. Immediately, about 2 minutes later, the phone rings again with the same unknown number. I want to ignore it, but it feels like the call won't go away if I pretend not to hear it. Adrenaline is creeping into my system. I sit up and press the answer button first. My rationality can convince me not to. At first I don't say anything, but I hear a soft breathing on the other end of the line. That's my first real shock. Not a heavy breathing like in a horror movie, but it's obvious someone is there. I still don't say anything. I just say, "Hello." It sounds shaky to my own ears. The breathing continues for a while, then the call disconnects. No words, just the sound of someone on the line, and then the click. I feel cold all over. I have received many wrong number calls in my life, but usually the caller will say something like "sorry, wrong number" before hanging up. This time it was different. I am not sure why, but it made me feel uncomfortable. This time I put the phone down, turned the screen to see if it was lit up. My eyes looked at the clock. 3:05 a.m. Great, I think this is exactly what I need, as I have to check out in a few hours. I try to breathe slowly and reason, maybe it's some stranger calling in the middle of the night, maybe they're bored. But then my phone rings again, this time saying the same number. I hit the answer button. Immediately I say, "Who is this?" I can hear something in the background, maybe a slight buzzing of the TV or static. Then a voice whispers my name clear as day and hangs up. I feel my skin crawl when I hear my name in that whisper, feeling violated as a private violation. This person knows exactly who I am. My heartbeat is pounding in my ears. I turn the phone off without a second thought. I don't want to risk it. If they have my number, they could text or call me at any time, but I don't know how they got it in the first place. I sit there for a few minutes in the dark, listening to my own breathing. My palms were sweaty and my stomach felt tense. My mind was racing with questions. Who would do something like this? Why would they do it? And how did they know my name? I stood up, went to the small bathroom and splashed water on my face. The sink was cramped and there was a cheap fluorescent light bulb overhead buzzing. I stared at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. I looked stressed. I tried to calm myself. I wiped my face with a rough hotel towel and turned off the bathroom light. The darkness in the main room seemed heavier than before. I went back to bed, checked the lock on the door. As I passed, it was secure. I also had a standard chain lock, the flimsy kind you usually find in hotel rooms. No strange noises from the hallway, no footsteps, no muffled voices. For a second I considered going down to the front desk to complain, but what would I say when someone called me 3 times? They whispered my name and I was afraid the front desk would probably shrug and say there was nothing they could do about cold calls. Suddenly, to my mobile phone, I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers through my hair, trying to figure out if I was overreacting. That's when the phone in the room started ringing. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. The loud ringing broke the silence like a loud alarm. I felt an immediate sense of dread. I hoped it was just the reception calling about some standard issue like holding a credit card or reminding me of a checkout time. That would be a normal explanation, but by 3 a.m. it seemed more likely. I told myself it had to be the reception. I picked it up, the receiver, and cleared my throat to say hello. My voice was shaky. There was a pause long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then a man's voice came through softly but clearly. He was still awake. He knew I was in that room, alert and frightened. The hairs on my arms stood up. I gripped the phone. The receiver. I didn't say a word. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, body hot, and I can barely think who is who. They not only have my mobile number but also the extension of the room, and they know my name. No accident, no coincidence. I jump out of bed and double-check that the door is still locked. I look through the peephole. The hallway is dark, lit by the usual dim hotel lights. I see no one. Everything is still silent. I put my ear to the door for a while but hear nothing but the distant hum of the elevator. IG Inside the hallway lights flickered a little. I felt a breeze from somewhere, probably the air conditioning system. I waited a few seconds, scanning every corner of the room, expecting someone to jump out or dash out of the corner. Nothing. I closed the door, locked it, then shoved a chair from the small table under the door handle. Felt a little silly, but I wanted an extra layer of security. Then I went straight to the phone on the bedside table and dialed the front desk. A woman answered in a polite tone, as if she had just woken up from a nap. I told her my name, my room number, and I was getting strange calls. She stopped, looking confused, and said, "We haven't made any calls to your room. No internal calls coming from our system, sir." That's all she said to me. Her tone was calm and a little dismissive, as if she was used to people calling at odd hours with strange complaints. I asked her if anyone had maybe messing with the phone line. She said no. I asked her to check it out. Maybe a guest asked me by name. She said no one had come near the desk about me. She suggested calling security, but I guess I was hesitant, because I wasn't sure if that would make things worse, or even if there was anything they could do. She said let her know if it happened again, but if not, she advised me to lock the door and let her know in the morning if there was a bigger problem. I hung up, feeling cold in my stomach. It was 3:20 a.m. By then. I turned on the small lamp on the table near the TV, which bathed the room in a dim yellow light. I turned off all the other lights so I could see better through the peephole. If anyone was walking by, the dark corners of the room made me uncomfortable, but I forced myself to look around carefully. I checked under the bed, opened the cupboard, pulled down the shower curtain. Nothing. No signs of break-in. No footprints, nothing strange. I sat on the chair in the small desk, eyes glued to the door. My phone is off, which feels a little bit of a relief, but also a sense of isolation. If something is really wrong, I need to turn it back on or use the phone in the room. Every minute that passes, my whole body tenses, my muscles stiffen, my skin is damp with sweat. I keep wiping my palms on my pajama pants. Every time the air conditioner goes off, I feel like I can hear footsteps in the hallway, then it comes back on and the buzzing drowns it out. Everything happens again. I try to think of who would have my number, know what room I am in. Maybe someone at work trying to tell a lame joke. They wouldn't do that at 3 o'clock in the morning, and how would they get in? The phone number, whispering my name, sounds personal, doesn't sound like any of my coworkers. I run through the possibilities in my head, but in the end nothing works. I decide to at least try to get some sleep, even though I know it's just as wishful thinking. I move the chair away from the door, check the lock again, bow, and back to bed. I leave the light on. I lie on the covers, thinking that if I need to run to the door I won't get caught. And the heartbeat finally starts to slow down a bit. I keep glancing at the silent phone, half expecting it to ring again. If it rings, I have no other plan than to answer and tell that bastard to leave me alone, but the phone doesn't ring again. A few hours pass. In a semi-conscious state, my body feels exhausted, but my mind can't stop. The image of the phone glowing in the dark keeps playing over and over. In my thoughts, the whisper, "You're still awake," won't leave me. I feel so tense that even the slightest creak sound makes me jump. I recall the strange pattern of the air conditioner turning on and off about 3 more times before I notice the first signs of dawn shining through the thick curtains. At 6 a.m. I've had enough. I turn on the light on high, take clothes out of suitcase and get dressed. My hands are shaking. I stuff things into bag, not bothering to fold them. I was determined to leave the place as soon as possible. I didn't care about missing out on free breakfast or staying until checkout. I just wanted to go. I remember I could barely concentrate on simple tasks like zipping up my bag. I kept looking around, expecting another call. I finally walked out into the hallway. The lights were brighter than at night. A cleaning cart was parked near one of the rooms. At the end of the room, a maid in uniform was slowly moving from door to door. She barely glanced at me. I got into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and just stared at the closed door. The door opened again at the front desk. I told the woman from the night before that I wanted to check out. I wasn't mad at her, I just wanted to leave. She typed a few keys on the computer. She asked everything. She nodded slowly but didn't ask for more details. She said she was sorry I had a bad experience. She gave me the receipt and that was it. No one else seemed to care much. Walked out of those sliding glass doors and felt the morning air hit my face. It was a relief. I threw my bag in my car, got in and locked the door. I just sat there for a few seconds breathing. My mind was filled with everything that had happened during the night. My phone was still off. I turned it on, half expecting to see a bunch of texts or missed calls from that unknown number, but there was nothing. Like it had never happened. All the way home I kept replaying the whispers and the ringing of the phone. It still hurts me even now, especially the moment when I heard my name. This wasn't a ghost story. I knew there wasn't. Darkness was drifting through the room, no unexplained movement. No supernatural nonsense, just someone had taken my name, my cell phone number and the extension in that hotel room is what makes it so upsetting. Someone deliberately invading my privacy in a place where I am supposed to feel safe at night. I never found out who it was. I tried asking around for a while, then asking people at work if they had called or if they knew someone in that city. No one admitted anything. I never got another call like that. It was a one-off, but it bothered me for a long time. It still bothers me. It feels personal in a way that random pranks don't. Maybe the person was just bored or thought it would be funny. Maybe they had access to the hotel's reservation system. I don't know. I do know that since that night I am especially careful with my personal information when I travel. I don't tell people where I am. I try to use a different name when checking in whenever possible, or at least I am cautious about who knows my room number, and I hardly ever answer the phone from strangers in the middle of the night. Memories are so raw, sometimes just a simple ring can bring it back. The feeling of that dark hotel room at 3 o'clock in the morning and the voice on the other end whispering my name in the big picture of everything. Nothing big happened. I wasn't harmed. I left on my own to check out and go home, but that night reminded me that really fear doesn't always come from dramatic events. Sometimes just a phone call at the wrong time with the wrong words and the realization that someone out there knows exactly where you are when you think you're alone is enough to shock you, even if no one dies. If there's no direct threat, I never went back to that hotel. I avoided that city for a while, but eventually life goes on. Whenever I think of that voice whispering my name in the dark, I felt a twist in my gut, so simple, so direct, and it felt like the beginning of something worse. I was just glad it ended there and I could leave without further incident. I guess that's all there is to say. It was the most disturbing night I've ever spent in a hotel, and I hope I never experience something like that again. I felt a chill run down my arm. The moment I stepped off the bus, my watch said it was past midnight and I was coming back from a party in another city. The station was almost deserted. A single street lamp lit the sidewalk. The light flickered every few seconds, making everything gloomy. I noticed there were two other people around. One was leaning against a concrete pillar with his hands in his coat pockets, looking sleepy. The other was a man sitting at the end of a wooden bench. His head was bowed and he had his phone in his hand. I thought how tired everyone looked. I felt exhausted too, but a little restless. The party was loud and I had a few sodas, which made me restless. I slowly walked towards a metal bench under a dusty billboard, my bag heavy on my shoulder. I could still hear the bus engine behind me as it left. The station had collapsed. Almost silent, the wind made a gentle whistle through the open space. The man at the end of the bench didn't move. The other man by the pole yawned and walked towards the toilets. I checked the schedule on my phone, which was gone. The bus was running. I needed to find out where the exit was, or maybe call a carpool, but the app said there were no drivers in the area. I thought about asking the man on the bench if he knew of any other night buses or taxi stands nearby, but he seemed distant from me. Covering most of his head, his phone screen lit up in his hand. I stared at my phone message. Feels weird. Good evening, it's cold, right? I typed back in Portuguese. It's arrived. I kept it short. I waited. The wind was still blowing. My hoodie wasn't enough for that sudden drop in temperature, so I zipped it all the way up and stuck my hands in my pockets. My breath came out in weak puffs of steam. I realized I was alone because I couldn't see the other person anymore. They probably hitchhiked or walked. About 10 seconds later I heard a soft ring from the man's phone. I tilted his head slightly. He picked up the phone, touched the screen, then put it back in his pocket. My phone vibrated. My hand. I read faster. You be careful here, the night is long. This time it's English. My pulse increased. I looked at the man. He stood up without saying a word. He seemed taller than at first. I realized he moved as if he had a purpose. I watched him walk straight out of the house. The station. The benches are empty. The sound of your footsteps echoing. You never look back. You don't get on any buses and don't ask anyone for directions. I feel my stomach tighten. I tap the screen to call the number. No one answers. The ringing rings a few times, then goes to voicemail, but no greeting. My mouth is dry, so I swallow. I send another text. Who are you? Why are you texting me? I wait, but nothing else comes. I stand there, eyes darting around the station. The fluorescent lights overhead are flashing. The guy who took a break earlier is gone. The bus schedule is on. The sign nearby says the station will be open, but there won't be any other buses for hours. I think about taking a taxi, but I don't see any nearby. The regular taxi ranks are empty. The small window of the bus station is closed and the lights inside that office are off. I feel restless. My heart is beating faster than normal. I shift my weight from foot to foot, checking my phone again. No more messages. I tell myself it's probably just someone messing around, but how did they get my phone number? I looked towards the exit where the man left the streets outside. The light was dim. I could see a few cars passing by the city. It felt quiet. I wiped my palms on my jeans, took a deep breath and told myself to calm down. I decided to walk out of the station. My plan was to find a brighter area and maybe catch a taxi. The sidewalk outside was cold and damp. Under my sneakers the wind was stronger. Outside the street was wide with a few closed shops behind steel shutters. I saw a small diner across the avenue with a flashing neon sign open. The place looked old, but it was the only business open I could see, so I headed towards it. My phone rang again. I froze in the middle of the crosswalk. I checked, there were no new messages. It turned out it was just a social media notification, but my heart was still pounding. I hurried into the diner. A small bell jingled as I opened the door. The smell of coffee and fried food hit me. There were two customers sitting in two separate booths, both busy with their own business. A staring waitress stood behind the counter. She gave me a slight nod, so I went to a booth near the window and put my bag down. The waitress came and asked if I wanted anything. I ordered a cup of black coffee with no sugar. I didn't know if I was hungry, but I ended up ordering fries. My stomach was in knots, but I thought maybe something salty would help me relax. I took out my phone again. I stared at the unknown number. I pressed to call again. No one answered. I tried blocking phone number, but part of me wanted to see if this person had sent anything else, so I didn't block it. I just sat there with the phone in my hand. The waitress brought me my coffee. It was hot and smelled really strong. I took a sip and felt a warmth in my chest. The fries arrived shortly after. They looked a little greasy. I ate some but kept glancing at my phone. My mind was racing with questions. Had the man overheard me on the phone earlier? Had I mentioned my number? Had he seen me type it somewhere at some point? I looked around the diner. There were old posters and a TV mounted in the corner. A late-night talk show was playing. The volume was low. The other customers looked tired, probably locals or passing truck drivers. None of them looked like the man on the bench. I wondered if he was out there, were there on the sidewalk, or did he get in the car? About 30 minutes passed. Maybe longer. My phone was still silent. I felt a little calmer. I finished my coffee, paid the bill and asked the waitress if she knew of any taxi companies nearby. She gave me a card for the local service. I dialed and asked for a ride. They said it would be about 15 minutes. I walked outside to wait for a taxi. The street was a little darker than before. Some of the lights seemed dimmer, or maybe I was imagining things. My phone battery was at 20%. I kept glancing at unknown number, thinking maybe I had missed something. Nothing. Then a faint beep, just another social media ping. I turned off notifications for everything except calls and texts. My ears were alert for any sound behind me, any footsteps, but all I heard was the buzzing of a street lights and engine noise. Car was a few blocks away when the taxi arrived. I got in the back seat. The driver was a middle-aged man who seemed quite friendly. I gave him my apartment address. He nodded and started driving. The interior of the car smelled like old cigarettes. The radio was turned down low, some local station. I tried to relax in the seat. My phone was on my lap. Part of me expected it to ring. The driver broke the silence. He asked me if I was coming from the bus stop. I said yes, and I mentioned how it was pretty quiet at the time. He nodded, saying it was dangerous around there sometimes, especially on the weekends. I asked him if he had heard of someone playing with people's phones or something. He looked at me confusedly in the rearview mirror and said he had not, but there were always some strange characters hanging around my building. About 15 minutes away the driver drove up to the front gate and I paid the fare. The street was quiet with only a few windows lit up in the apartments around. The security light above the entrance to my building flickered a little. I get out of the car, grab your bag and thank the driver. He drives away, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I feel a little shiver. The wind has died down but the air is still cold. I go to the gate and enter the code. The lock clicks. I go through the small courtyard on the stairs and reach my apartment on the second floor. The hallway smells of old paint and cleaning products. I insert the key into the door, step in and lock the door behind me. I turn on the kitchen light and put my bag on the chair. My apartment is small but familiar. I kick off my shoes and check my phone again. Nothing. I sigh. My heart rate finally slows down. I plug my phone into the charger on the kitchen counter and take a sip of water. Then I open the fridge and drink some orange juice straight from the box. I feel tired, but I am completely awake. At the same time, I look at my phone on the kitchen counter, the screen lights up with the charging symbol, I swipe my finger over the unknown number, wondering if I should delete it or not. I decide to keep it there, evidence if needed. Thinking about calling the police, but I have no real evidence of any wrongdoing. I got just a few strange messages, no real threats except a vague warning to be careful. It wasn't really a crime. I went into the bedroom. I could hear the old plumbing in the wall creaking every now and then. I threw clothes in the hamper, then put on sweatpants and a t-shirt. I turned off the main light and left the night light on. I climbed into bed, phone in hand, part of me expecting it to vibrate at any moment, but it remained silent. I opened a chat with my best friend, typed a message about what had happened and then deleted it before sending it. Felt silly to bother anyone at that hour with a vague story. I checked the time, 1:45 a.m. My eyes were burning with exhaustion. I set the alarm for the next morning and tried to steady my mind, constantly replaying the moment when I noticed that guy with his phone. The way he picked up the phone, read something and walked away. The long night message echoed in my head. I finally fell asleep. I had restless dreams every time I woke up at night. I checked my phone, no new messages. Around dawn, I finally got a few hours of real sleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the curtains. The phone was still next to me, silent. I got up and took a shower, hoping the hot water would clear my head for the day. Things were less stressful. I still felt restless even though I tried to reason it all out. Maybe the guy saw my number on a piece of paper or overheard me talking to a friend at the party, or maybe he was bored and decided to scare someone. But strangely, he used both Portuguese and English. That haunted me. I checked the call history on my phone. Unknown number, didn't show any other attempts, no messages. I dialed again just to see if nothing changed. No voicemail, no greeting. I hung up. For the next few days, I kept my eyes open to see if there was any strange activity on the phone. Nothing happened. Like that text conversation never existed. I tried a reverse lookup of the number. Nothing came up. My phone company said it was a prepaid line, untraceable. I told a few of my friends about it. They said it was probably just a random stranger. They joked that I should ignore it. I still felt violated. Someone had my number and decided to send me mysterious messages at a time when I was alone in a deserted train station. I thought about installing new security apps, changing my number, or being more careful about who I shared my number with, but part of me just chalked it up to a strange encounter late at night. I never found out who sent those messages. I never saw the man again. That too, I still think about it sometimes, especially if I'm out late at night waiting for a bus or walking through a quiet area. I glance around and wonder if someone is watching me from the corner of the room. Keep an eye on my phone. I've learned to keep my phone closer, keep my details private, and not trust the silence around me. Nothing really happened to me that night. I got home safely, but that feeling of being exposed still stays with me. That's how he got up and left without getting on the bus right after sending it. That text was his way of warning me to be careful. The night was longer than usual. Even though it ended like any other night, it ultimately taught me something about how easy it is for someone to get personal information. It can be as simple as looking over your shoulder or seeing your number on the screen. It was unsettling, but life went on. I still went to parties, I still took the bus, I still checked my phone at stations. I just did it with a little more caution. I made sure no one was looking over my shoulder, and I didn't show my phone in crowded places. I don't think about it much anymore, but I remember how my pulse raced when I read those messages. I remember the cold sweat under my hoodie. I remember my throat going dry as I sat there realizing a stranger had access to my phone number. It didn't seem dramatic, but in that moment, my senses were on high alert. It was enough to leave an impression on me. So it was a story not supernatural, not full of dramatic events, but felt real and scary enough at the time, and to this day I still wonder how he got my number. I never figured it out. I will never forget the night I left work later than usual and drove down that deserted state highway. It was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because it was the same day I had to finish an unexpected project at the office. I ended up staying 2 hours longer than my normal shift. I felt exhausted when I finally saw that I had packed up my laptop and papers. My only thought was to go home and have a quick bite and go to bed. I walked out of the building and noticed that the parking lot was almost empty, only a few cars under the street lights. Mine was one of them. I drove and started the car. The radio was crackling. It was a late-night talk show. I wasn't interested in the topic, so I turned it off. I wanted the road from my office to the state highway to be quiet. Normally I would see quite a few cars, but it was almost 10 p.m. Most people would have gone home by then, especially on a weekday. I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls. I put my phone aside and focused on driving. My headlights were on. the road was 2 lanes but everything else looked dark, no street lights, just farmland on both sides and the occasional pact or fence. The sky was clear although I saw stars shining high above and spreading out in the darkness. I felt a little tense, probably just tired. My neck was stiff and my eyes felt heavy. I tried to stay awake by focusing on the lines on the asphalt. I passed a few mile markers and realized I hadn't seen any other cars in at least 10 minutes. My mind started to wander. I kept thinking about the work day, the frustration of having to tackle a project last minute, and I hate staying late without notice. I shook it off. Turned that thought off and told myself to focus on driving. The road was long and mostly straight with little bends here and there. After a while I spotted something on the right side of the road. At first it looked like a silhouette. I assumed it was a road sign or maybe a mailbox. As I got closer I realized it was a person's silhouette standing near the edge, near where the shoulder met a patch of land, the shape of the hand moving up and down almost like a weak wave. It looked like someone was trying to signal for help or hitchhiking. My instinctive reaction was to slow down. I wasn't used to seeing pedestrians out there, especially late. In my head wondering why a person was walking on that stretch of highway at 10 o'clock at night. When my headlights were on him I saw he was dressed casually, a button-up shirt, simple slacks and old sneakers, nothing fancy. Short and messy hair, his face looked pale. Something was wrong with his expression, not fear or despair, just blankness. He raised his hand again as if telling me to stop. I let off the gas, check my mirrors to make sure there are no cars behind me, but I don't see anyone else. The road is still empty. I get close enough to see his eyes, although not clearly. They look dark and he doesn't really blink. He stares at me as my car passes for a split second. I feel a tension in my chest. I don't know why. I've picked up strangers before, but usually during the day and usually near gas stations or accessible areas. This time it's different. It's at night, everyone is isolated and I'm exhausted. I think about stopping a few meters away to see if he needs assistance. Maybe he's stuck or his car has broken down somewhere, but as soon as that thought crosses my mind something else tells me that's not smart. The moment feels too strange. The road is dark and I don't see any broken down vehicles around me. I decide not to stop. I tell myself I will. Woke up with a start thinking about the face I saw the next morning at work. I felt dizzy. My coworker Sam noticed he lived near that state road, although he took a different route. We had a brief chat in the break room while I sipped my coffee. I told him I had seen a strange guy on the side of the highway. I described the man's clothing and the blank stare. Sam raised an eyebrow and said he had heard rumors from other locals. It was said that a mysterious man sometimes appeared along that stretch of road. Drivers slowed down thinking about stopping, and then, in a flash, he was on his way. No one knew his story was. Sam said the stories had been around for a long time, but there was no official explanation. I shivered when Sam told me. My stomach felt empty. I realized I wasn't the only one who had seen this. I asked Sam if he thought it was a joke or a local prank with the traveler. No, he just shrugged and said no one ever had a clear answer. Some people thought it was a normal guy who liked to wander around at night and hide when cars passed. Others thought it was something else. I wasn't sure what to believe. I just knew it scared me. I didn't want to drive back there alone so late again, but I had to because my job required me to stay late sometimes. That same day I tried to brush it off and get on with my work. Part of me wanted to prove I wasn't freaking out, but every time I thought about driving home after dark I felt my stomach tighten. My hands became clammy and I tensed my jaw. I told myself it was probably just a normal guy hiding in the trees. There were homeless people in the area, or maybe tramps passing by. Not impossible, but there was something about his face, that blank look, that bothered me. I couldn't forget the weekend. Then I work late again. I prepare myself for the drive home, telling myself to relax. I eat a snack before leaving the office, hoping I won't feel too tired. I leave the parking lot around 10. It is night time, the road is dark, but I still eyes wide open for any sign of pedestrians. My shoulders feel tense and I grip the steering wheel tighter than usual. The sound of my tires hitting the pavement fills the car and the outside world is pitch black. I pass where I see him glancing at the curb. Carefully, there is nothing there. I breathe a sigh of relief. Still, every little shadow or shape makes me sit up in my seat. I see a billboard in the distance for a second. It looks like a figure and my heart skips a beat. Then I realize it is just a big ad. I feel stupid for being so nervous. I reach for the radio to play some music at a low volume. I tell myself I have to calm. Everything was fine. The rest of the drive that night was quiet, no sign of any strange figures. When I got home I felt a little better, like maybe it was just a one-off. The next morning I saw Sam again. I told him I didn't see anyone this time. He laughed and said maybe the ghost he used that word for. Although I didn't like it was resting. I tried to joke again, but I still felt uncomfortable. I found myself replaying the moment I passed that man on the side of the road. I kept imagining his still posture and how he didn't move much except to raise his arm. I remembered the dark eyes, I remembered the angle of his chin, and how I couldn't see any clear expression, just a kind of blankness for a few weeks. That passed and I didn't see anything unusual. I drove the same road a few more times at night. Some nights I felt anxious and scanned the ditches and shoulders obsessively. Other nights I tried to distract myself by thinking about work or listening to podcasts, but the memory never left me completely. It was in the back of my mind waiting to come up whenever I found myself alone on a dark stretch of road. I eventually told a few other coworkers about it. I tried to phrase it casually as if I was telling a strange anecdote that surprised me. 2 people said they had heard of the same thing. One claimed she knew someone who had seen a man matching the description years ago. Another said he had read a post on a local forum where motorists were talking about a similar incident. No one had a solid explanation, but they all seemed to believe there was at least some truth behind it. Maybe it was a local. As a known curiosity in the area tells me this is not some elaborate story I made up in my head. Other people have had similar encounters. I am not the only one who drove past that lone figure on the side of the road wondering if they should pull over. I am not going to lie, I am relieved that no one was hurt in these stories. I have never heard of any attacks or accidents involving this man. It is just a strange sight that makes people wonder. I guess that is why I accept it as part of the commute. When I see a shape on the side of the road now I slow down enough to check around. I try to be alert. If it is a real person in distress I would consider calling for help or giving them directions to a gas station. But if it is the same guy with that blank face I am not sure I have the courage to stop. The uncertainty is too strong. I have thought about the moment that in my head many times. I think about the possibility of a simple explanation. Maybe he was just a wanderer, maybe he didn't want to be seen, maybe he quickly hid behind a bush. The road was covered in thick grass and patches of trees, so hiding wasn't hard. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I have memories of his eyes and the way he raised his arm that kept coming back at random times, like when I was alone in the office or when I was lying in bed and couldn't sleep. I guess that's my story. I was driving home late one night, saw a stranger on the side of the dark freeway, and then he disappeared. The next day I found out it was a common story in that area, and no one could fully explain. The man didn't hurt anyone and didn't chase cars. He just showed up and gestured like he wanted a ride and then disappeared. Maybe he was a real person with a reason to hide. Maybe what was he that's different? I don't have an answer. All I know is I felt a wave of fear that night, and it wasn't just my imagination. I know what I saw. I haven't told my family much about it because they would worry. I don't want them calling me late at night to check if I was okay driving home. As far as I know it was a one-time thing. I'm careful. I have no intention of investigating or looking for the man. I know about the rumors and stories, but I'll leave it as is. If it's a mistake or a trick of the eye, my eyes, let's just say if it was a hitchhiker he could have found help elsewhere. In any case I don't want to find out, so I say this story is true. It could have been a normal person. He could have ducked or run into the bushes. No big ending or tragic outcome. No one dead or injured, just one of those strange encounters people in the area talk about. Sometimes I see him, then he disappears. That's all, and the only evidence is my memory and the uneasy feeling in my gut whenever I remember him empty staring. I still feel my stomach tighten when I think about that night. I was in the diner where I worked, wiping down the last table near the front window. The place was empty except for me, and the only sound was the buzz of the neon lights outside and the hum of the fridge. It was almost 11 p.m. and I was tired. My back ached from bending over the frying pan in the oven all evening. I usually closed the door alone on weekdays because the boss didn't want to pay for a second person coming in that late. I was used to it. It wasn't a dangerous part of town, but it wasn't. It was very busy after dark. I turned off most of the lights, checked the counter one last time and locked the front door. The cold air hit me in the face immediately. It wasn't winter, but the night was cold and I was only wearing a shirt jacket over uniform. My breath came out short. The breaths as I exhaled. The street was quiet and there were only a few cars parked along the curb. The light of a distant street lamp made everything look pale and faded. I could hear my own footsteps on the sidewalk, a dull echo on the empty buildings. I parked 2 blocks away because it was rare to have a parking spot right in front of the diner. Sometimes I was lucky, but that night I didn't. As I walked I thought about how much I hated those 2 blocks. It wasn't that far, but when it was late and you were alone it felt Different every rustle of leaves or distant engine noise caught your attention. I shoved my hands in my coat pockets to keep warm. I looked around every few seconds to make sure I hadn't missed anything behind or beside me. As I rounded the corner before my car passed, I saw a dark shadow nearby. I squinted, trying to figure out if it was someone waiting for the car, just a random person walking by the dim streetlights, so I can only make out a silhouette. I slow down and try to see what's going on. The person is leaning forward looking into my driver's side window, almost studying it. He puts a hand on the door handle. I freeze for a second because it looks like he's fiddling with the lock. My heart starts pounding in my chest and my fingers clench. Without even realizing it, I decide to speak up. My voice sounds hoarse. "Need help here?" I ask. He slowly turns around and I see his face in the dim light. He's about me tall, maybe an inch taller, and he has short hair under a baseball cap. He doesn't look drunk or high, just calm, too calm for a person who can be confused about a car. He gives me this weird smile without showing his teeth. "I think this is my car," he says. "Don't move from the door." I feel a chill run down my body. I'm not that cold, but my skin is goosebumps. I know that if you think your car is by mistake, you usually back off when the real owner shows up, but he just stands there looking at me. I can feel my pulse in my neck and I swallow. I don't want to make things worse, but I don't want to appear weak either. "You sure?" I said, trying to keep my voice down. "Calm down, because this is definitely mine." I tried to smile a little, like I was still being friendly, but my nerves were fraying. The laughter died in my throat. He was still standing there. He glanced inside, then back at me. "You work late," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something off about the way he said it. I felt my stomach tighten even more. My palms started to sweat and I took a step back, keeping some distance between us. "Yeah, I closed the diner down the street," I said, nodding in the direction I came from. He took a step closer to me. I could smell cheap cologne mixed with the smell of the night streets. My mouth went dry. I was about to pull out my phone, but I was worried that pulling something out like that might agitate him. I also thought about running around him, but I didn't want him to grab me. I reached into my pocket for my keys. Instead, my voice was lower than I intended. "Look, if you're confused, maybe you should check the license plate or something." I know that sounds a bit confrontational, but I wanted him to back off. He tilted his head. "No need." I was wrong about that. He didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes staring at me like I was an object. He was studying. I felt my pulse pounding in my eardrums. It was a heavy thump thump thump. My thoughts were racing. I tried to guess if he had a weapon, but I didn't see anything in his hand. No, meaning he wasn't carrying anything in his jacket. I took a short breath and pressed the button on the key fob to unlock and then locked the car. The headlights flashed and the horn honked once, which startled me a little, but it also made him back away. He didn't go far. Just enough for me to step closer to the driver's door. I kept my eyes on him. My hands were shaking and my throat felt tight. I opened the driver's door. I could see the interior lights were on, and that was like a small relief. At least I could see inside and no one was there. I slid into the seat quickly. My heart was still pounding and I fumbled with the keys in the ignition. Which one?" I muttered under my breath. I turned on the engine and just then I glanced at him through the windshield. He was staring at me. His expression didn't change. His eyes locked on me for a second that felt like 10, and I couldn't look away even though I wanted to. I felt like if I blinked, what would happen? It will happen. I finally put it into drive and hit the gas and slid off the curb faster than normal. My tires made a brief screech. The noise on the pavement as I drove away. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there facing me, his hands in his pockets. No waving or shouting. He just stood there watching my taillights fade. I couldn't breathe properly until I reached Main Street. My chest felt tight and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I tried to inhale and exhale a few times. My breath was shaky and my mouth was still dry. I kept checking all the rearview mirrors for fear that I might see him following me in another car, but the road behind me was empty. I felt a little relieved, but I couldn't shake the tension. I noticed sweat on my forehead and the top of my shirt was damp around the collar. The city streets passed by in a blur of traffic lights and closed stores. I turned on the radio just to fill the silence, but I can't concentrate on the music. My mind is playing back the moment he said, "You work late, huh?" over and over again. When I get home I park in the designated spot outside my building. My fingers fumble with my house keys and I almost drop them twice. I hold looking around, half expecting the guy to show up out of the darkness. The entrance to the building is well lit, so I feel a little safer, but I still rush inside as fast as I can. After I lock my apartment, I lean back against the door and close my eyes. My heart is still pounding in my chest. I Wipe my forehead with the back of my hand and realize I'm shaking. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I close my eyes I see his face staring through the windshield. Around 3 a.m. I finally fall asleep from exhaustion. I wake up the next morning with a lump in my neck, probably because of the way. I thought about calling the police, but he really didn't do anything but act suspicious. I doubt they would do more than write a short report. I couldn't prove he was trying to break in, and he didn't threaten me with anything other than his strange actions. The next night I went back to work. The diner looked the same as usual. Bright lights. Customers still came in for coffee or burgers. I tried not to think about the night before, but around 10:30 p.m. I started to feel anxious. My hands were cold and I couldn't concentrate on cleaning. I asked my coworker to help me close the door, even though it meant I had to pay him out of pocket for an extra hour. I didn't want to walk alone to my car anymore. He looked at me a little confused but agreed as he could use the cash. When we were done I locked the front door and we both went out. I could tell my coworker was curious, but I didn't want to explain much. I just said I didn't like walking alone. Vulnerable. He stayed with me until I got in the car, then he waved goodbye and walked back to his car parked on another street. I kept expecting to see the same figure or a similar face lurking near the trunk, but no one was around. I got in the car, locked the doors and drove away. Eyes darting from mirror to mirror, scanning every car behind me. Nothing stood out. When I got home I was still nervous, but better than the night before. The following week I started parking as close to the diner as possible. Sometimes I got lucky and found a spot right across the street. Sometimes I still had to walk half a block, but I tried to avoid walking those 2 blocks. I asked my boss if we could get a spot behind the building, but he said no. I almost considered taking a cab home on nights I closed, but that cost would eat into my small paycheck. One particular night, maybe a month later, I went through my normal routine. I closed at 11 p.m., wipe the table off, turn off the lights and step out onto the empty sidewalk. The neon sign blinks off. My car is across the street, not too far away, which still makes me feel better. I feel the same lump in my stomach. I scan the sidewalk and look around at the parked cars. No one is out there, at least not that I can see. I walk to my car, get in quickly and lock the doors. Immediately my heart speeds up, even though there was no reason for it that night, just the lingering anxiety. I start the engine and take one last look around. No one is there. I remind myself that nothing serious happened except for a tense encounter, but it's enough to make me look back. Sometimes I wonder if he's planning on stealing my car, or if he's just checking random cars for an easy target. Could he be the one who wants to rob me directly? I don't know, but that weird smile and the way he said "you work late, huh?" still sits in my gut. Feeling feels like a warning or a hint that he knows my routine. The thought of someone watching my routine at night scares me. I told a few friends about it and they all said the same thing. Change your routine, be aware of your surroundings, maybe carry some pepper spray. I always keep one in my pocket now just in case. I also make sure to change my closing routine when I can, although I can only do certain things. The diner's schedule is the diner's schedule. I can't change the closing time and I can't make a parking spot right at the door. I haven't at least not seen that guy again. I don't realize part of me expects him to show up again one night, standing next to the same spot waiting to see if I show up. The thought makes my stomach drop. I try not to think too much about it because I still have to live my life, but I can't deny that my sense of security has been affected. That night I used to walk to my car without much thought. Now I hold the keys in my hand, checking every shadow before unlocking the door. That's the whole story. No big violence, no big explosion, just a tense moment on a dark street, but it was enough to make me wonder how safe I really am when I'm out there alone, especially late at night. I don't think I'll ever forget that face, the way he stared at my car then looked into my eyes like he was challenging me. It made me feel exposed. I still parked as close as I could to the diner. I didn't want to be in that situation again, standing there with my heart pounding, not sure if the next move would be a surprise attack or just a weird conversation. Either way, I didn't want to risk it twice. I moved into this old apartment thinking it would be a fresh start. I was wrong. Right, that first night, I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. I was tired from carrying boxes and cleaning the place, so I collapsed on the couch around midnight. The lights were off and the only thing I heard was the hum of the fridge. About an hour later I woke up to the sound of dripping water, not loud but steady enough to keep me from falling back asleep. I checked the bathroom sink first, but it was dry. Then I walked into the kitchen. I heard a dripping sound somewhere above the ceiling, which looked old with a few cracks near the corners. I thought there might be a leaking pipe inside the wall. I didn't see any water stains or damp patches. The floor was still dry. The sound continued like a mist of dripping, but it wasn't coming from the kitchen faucet itself. it seemed like it was higher up, closer up to the ceiling. I didn't have the energy to investigate further that night, so I went back to the couch and tried to ignore it. The next day I bought a step ladder and a flashlight. I decided to check the loft space or whatever was above the kitchen ceiling. The apartment was on top floor, so no other units. There was an old crawl space with a panel in the hallway. I pushed it out and shined a flashlight inside it, dusty with cobwebs, and I saw a few pieces of old insulation. No signs of leaks, no puddles, no dampness spots. I was up there maybe 15 minutes, checked every corner I could reach, nothing, so I went back and sealed the panel and thought maybe it was just random pipe noise. But then the dripping continued for the next few nights, always around 3 a.m., sometimes lasting a minute or two. Other times it lasted for half an hour. It wasn't loud enough to call maintenance at that hour, so I just dealt with it. I tried earplugs, which helped a bit, but I could still feel the faint rhythm of those drops, which was annoying. I even thought that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe it was the old building settling down, which made me anxious. About a week later something else happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m. to that dripping sound. I decided I had had enough. I got up, went to the kitchen and turned on the light switch, but nothing happened. The light didn't turn on. I stood there for a while, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The dripping continued. I reached over and fumbled around on the counter and finally found my phone to use as a flashlight. I pointed the phone light towards the sink. This time it was dripping. Actually, it was dripping like it was only half open. I knew for sure I had turned it off tight before I went to bed, because I had a habit of checking. I was a bit obsessive about that thing. I turned the tap off. I stood there listening for the noise to stop. No sound of water falling into the sink. Then I noticed the small window curtain next to the fridge was swaying a little, as if a wind had just blown through. That window is usually closed. I walked over and checked to see if it was still locked from the inside. I put my hand on it to see if there was a draft. No wind. The curtain was still moving a little, but slowing down. I looked around the kitchen. Everything else seemed stable. No cupboards were open, no drawers were pulled out, no signs of forced entry. I went out into the hallway to checked the circuit breaker, thinking it might be a power outage. That's when I heard the fridge buzzing again, so the power wasn't off. I turned the stove switch off, then back on a few times. The light never came on. I walked back to the living room. The TV was off and its little standby light was dark, as if it had been unplugged. I walked over to check the power cord. It was plugged in. I tried turning the TV on, but nothing happened. Then I noticed the cable box was off too. It normally shows the time, but it was blank. It looked like it was just the living room and kitchen. The outlets were off. The hallway lights were on, although the bathroom lights were working, which made me think there was a local electrical fault. I turned the circuit breakers in those areas off and on again. After a few tries, the kitchen lights finally came back on. I heard the TV powering on and the cable box lights came back on, but when I back to the living room, the TV was out of sync. It was showing static, as if it had lost its channel settings. I had never seen it like that before. I had to rescan everything. I didn't sleep much that night. My heart was pounding like I had too much caffeine. I found myself glancing at the window blinds and taps every few minutes. I even checked the main door lock. It seemed fine. Everything was locked from the inside. It felt weird, almost like someone had gone through the kitchen, damaged the taps and left without a trace. But that didn't make sense. If they had a key, I would have heard the door open. My apartment door was quite noisy. It creaked safe when you opened the door even a little. The next morning I called the maintenance guy and asked him to check the pipes and wiring. He came around noon and checked the stove light switch, checked circuit breaker. ET said everything was okay. He turned on the water tap, checked the water pressure. ET saw no leaks underneath. I told him about the crawl space, but he said there was nothing there except old insulation and some wiring for the building's ventilation system. He also said the building was about 4 years old, so some cracks, the odd drip, might just be part of the charm of the place. He tried to reassure me, saying that was normal. I wasn't sure, but he left me with that explanation. That evening I spoke to the building manager, a guy called Roberto. I asked him if there had been any reports of break-ins or weird plumbing issues. He looked at me knowingly. He said he meant you hear noises at night. I nodded. He told me people had complained about the same things, dripping at odd hours, lights flickering, TVs going dark, signal no reason. That made me even more worried. I asked him if the tenant ever found out. Roberto shrugged. He said the tenant blamed the age of the building, or maybe someone sneaky. Nothing was proven that night. I double-checked everything before going to bed. I did Make sure the windows were locked, the doors were latched, the taps were closed. I even unplugged the TV just to see if that made any difference. I fell asleep around midnight exhausted but determined to see if anything else happened. Definitely at 3 a.m. I startled awake. It was a drip drip drip. I quietly got up without turning on the light. I walked slowly towards the kitchen, feeling my pulse in my ears. My palms felt sweaty. The hallway was dark but I could see a faint light from outside, street light in the living room. Just in case I got to the kitchen entrance, I got vous n'y pourrez plus vous en passer pour un moyen de vous aider à le faire numb. Mind starts racing. Did I forget to turn off the tap? No, I remember turning it off. I turned it on and off once. A few times, then closed it. The dripping stopped shortly after. I heard a quick shuffle behind me near the living room. My room SP turned around expecting to see someone. The living room was empty. The curtains were still there. The door was locked. I forced myself to go through. Checked, the door was still latched from the inside. I felt my chest, my hands were shaking a little. I could feel my heart beating. Alors je vais vous aider à trouver un moyen de vous aider à le faire, but the handle vous n'avez pas à vous en soucier. That it wasn't a random plumbing problem, someone had to move it, but there was no one in the apartment except me. I looked around the apartment to see if anything was wrong. All the windows were closed. The locks were intact. No new footprints on the dusty spots near windows. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet. The main door was also locked. I also checked the chain from inside. Everything was safe. I went back to the kitchen, opened closed each cupboard. Looked under the sink. Nothing. I went to bed feeling uncomfortable. I left a small light on in the bedroom just to calm my nerves. The next week was the same again. Around 1500 hours Shantae. I heard a dripping sound, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to make me stand up immediately. Every time the handle JENAI rain avoir avec ca. The curtain swayed as if someone had just passed by. One night the living room TV lost all channels even though I had set them at the beginning of the day. Another night the kitchen lights wouldn't turn on until I turned on the circuit breaker. I asked Roberto again if anyone else had a key, where he said the building had a master key for emergencies, but it was kept in a locked cabinet. The maintenance staff only used it with a work order. They recorded every time they took it. There was no record of it being used on my apartment. At night he said I could change the lock if I wanted. I went out and bought a new lock and installed it. J'étais à 3h00 du matin. Drip drip drip. I ran into the kitchen, turned on the light. Saw the tap dripping. The rest of the apartment still no sign of a break-in. I felt trapped in some strange cycle. I tried staying up from midnight to 3 o'clock Shantae to see what was going on, but that night nothing happened. Only when I fell asleep was I woke up by the noise. I started having trouble sleeping. I looked tired all the time. My coworkers asked me if I was stressed. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just said I was having trouble sleeping in the new place, but inside I was very nervous. My nerves would pour as y exceder. You connected to a webcam. For you connected to a webcam on the sink to record overnight. I wanted proof that the tap turned on by itself or that someone was sneaking in. I saw a hand so rough and dark. The only light was from a small night light near the door. The doorknob just moved almost by itself. The curtain at the back shook slightly, but there was no shape or form, no shadow, no reflection. I felt sick. I played it over and over again. I saw the same thing. There was movement, but it didn't make sense. I showed a friend the video and he said maybe the handle was loose or the water pressure changed, but that didn't explain why it happened at the same time every night. He told me I should move out, but I didn't have the money to break the lease. I showed Roberto the video. He watched it, shook his head and said he didn't know what to tell me. He reminded me that the last tenant moved out early because of these issues. Management never found any physical behavior. Because he asked me if I ever felt threatened, I said no physically, but it gave me headaches. He suggested that I should ignore it or learn to live with it, which wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I didn't have much choice. The apartment kept doing it. A few nights I started sleeping with the radio to drown out the dripping, and some nights I wore noise-canceling headphones, but the tap still dripped. Sometimes I found the kitchen lights not flashing. Sometimes the TV was completely out of time. When I woke up I never found footprints, never found damage to the lock, never saw any signs of a break in. The place was always locked from the inside. I tried everything, checking the tap washers, replacing all the taps with new ones, taping the windows shut to see if it would open. Nothing worked. After a few months I decided I had enough stress, it was exhausting and I couldn't sleep. I wasn't really scared for my life, but I was restless. I told the building management I was leaving. I explained the situation to them and they let me break the lease with a fine I paid and started looking for a new place. I never found evidence of who or what was making a mess at 3 a.m. Roberto told me he had heard stories about that apartment for a few years. He said no one had been there for long. It could have just been the old wiring of the building and the plumbing could have had someone with a hidden key. I will never really know. All I can say is it felt too intentional to be a random leak. The knobs were always turned, the curtains were always moving as if someone had walked by, the TV was always broken as if it had been unplugged. Or the input had been changed, but no matter what I did I couldn't catch anyone red-handed and there was no sign of a break-in, which left me with more questions than answers. Even now when I think back, I can't point to anything that was completely impossible. It could have been an extremely silent intruder or some strange malfunction in the plumbing and electrical, nothing I saw that defied the laws of nature, but it certainly felt off. Okay, it felt like someone or something in that apartment at night moving around, flipping the taps and messing with the TV. No trace. I'm in a new apartment, not fancy but at least it's quiet. Sometimes I wake up at night expecting to hear a dripping, but there's just silence. I miss that old place and there's a weird feeling in my stomach. I know it wasn't a dream. I went up to the narrow space, changed the locks, installed cameras. I tried everything but still couldn't find a good reason for what happened. The building management just shrugged. The last tenant seemed to complain about it too. Maybe it's just one of those unexplainable things that happen in old buildings. I don't really know, but the feeling of standing there in my pajamas at 3 a.m. watching the tap drip even though I turned it off hours ago is something I'll never forget. And if anyone asks me about weird experiences in apartments old, I'll tell them this story. It's real enough to make you wonder, but there's no evidence of anything supernatural. It's just a thing that happened and there's nothing I can do to stop it. I still remember that night. I realized how strange a place can be when you're alone, even if you've been there a thousand times. I work in a commercial building that's mostly offices. During the day, people are coming and going, phones are ringing all the time, but at night the place becomes a different environment. I often stay late because my workload is so high and the usual social lifts are turned off in the evenings, which means I have to use the service lift at the end of the corridor next to the maintenance room. I put my head down and went home. The late shift never bothered me because it was nice to get things done without being disturbed. 9 or 10 p.m., the main lights in the hallway were on, but some smaller offices had their lights off completely. It could be dark, but I was used to it. The service elevator itself was nothing fancy, just an old elevator with metal walls, a small overhead light, and that distinct stench. One night, I finished work around 10:30. I had been rereading a big report for hours and my eyes were tired. I turned off my computer and left the office. I walked to the hallway and noticed that the floor was mostly dark, except for a few emergency lights. I headed towards the service elevator. My legs were stiff from sitting all day, so I walked a little slower. I saw the usual sign on the social elevator saying it was off after 8 p.m. The service elevator was used. Nothing new there. I pressed the service elevator call button and waited. The building air conditioning still running, but the air seemed heavier. I don't know if it's just me getting tired, but sometimes things seem a little off. If I'm alone in a quiet space, my mind will pick up small noises, maybe a faint hum or a click from somewhere. I remember hearing my own voice, the echo of my breathing in the hallway. After a while the door slid open and I stepped in. I pressed the ground floor button where the exit to the parking lot was. The elevator started moving down smoothly. I shifted my bag from one hand to the other and looked at the scene. The wall was scratched under the small lights overhead. The reflection on those metal walls can be a little warped, so I never paid much attention to it. Usually it goes straight down to the ground floor without stopping, especially at that hour, but this time I felt a little jerk. The elevator slowed down, then stopped at a number. The floor looked completely unlit. The door opened right up. I leaned out a little, half expecting the sensor to be triggered by someone. There were no lights in that hallway, no movement. It felt like the power was out on that floor, or maybe no one was using it. I called out, "Hello." No answer. The darkness was thick, almost like a curtain. I could see the faint shapes of the walls, but there weren't any windows providing light. It was pitch black and smelled a bit stale, probably from not being used. The doors were still open. The elevator didn't move. I was a little Annoyed, so I kept pressing the close button. Nothing happened for a few seconds and it felt like a long time. My heart rate was increasing as I didn't see any reason why the elevator would stop there. Finally the doors started to close. I breathed out and tried to calm down, thinking it was just a glitch. Then as the doors were about to close completely, they jerked again as if something had triggered the sensor, but I not seeing any hands or objects blocking the entrance. I walked over and looked around, but no one was there. I was sure of it. At that moment I had such an uneasy feeling. I pressed the button again, the door closed and the elevator continued to go down. My shoulders tensed. I shook my head and told myself that it was late, I was tired, it was just an accident. Then I looked at the reflective surface in front of me. I saw my face was a little pale when viewed from above. The light, my eyes widened. That was when I noticed something else in the reflection, a silhouette behind me. It was a tall man, short hair, standing still in the back corner of the elevator. My heart started pounding, my palms sweated and my mouth went dry. I turned around, immediately expecting to see someone just a step away, but no one was there. I froze for a moment, my ears buzzed. The elevator was empty except for me. The overhead lights flickered a little, but that was it. That's it. No one there. The elevator isn't big, so if there were people I would have seen them right away. From a distance my chest felt tight. Part of me wanted to punch the emergency stop button and run out, but we went down. I found myself staring at the wall behind me, trying to figure out if there was some weird shadow. There was nothing that looked like a man standing there. The elevator dinged on the ground floor and the doors opened. I basically stumbled out, not even looking back to see if the doors had closed properly. My footsteps sounded heavy in the empty lobby. The security guard was at the front desk, but he was reading a magazine. He looked up and asked if everything was okay. I hesitated. I wasn't sure how to explain what I saw. In the end, I just said yeah, I was fine. The elevator was acting weird. He shrugged and went back to his magazine. I walked out into the parking lot. My hands were shaking as I got my car. Taking my keys off, I felt silly, like I was letting my imagination runs wild, but I know what I saw, or at least I know what it looked like in the reflection. There was even thought about the reflection maybe being distorted, maybe just a trick of the light or my own shape at a weird angle, but at the time it didn't feel like it. It seemed too real. The next days I tried to keep to my routine. I stayed up late again to finish tasks. Everything was normal except I found myself checking the time more often. I didn't want to be in the elevator too close to midnight or even 10 p.m. One evening around 9 o'clock I decided to take the stairs. Walking from the 12th floor to the ground floor was quite a struggle, especially after a day of work. But I did it. By the time I got to the car my legs were burning and I was out of breath, but at least I didn't have that tense feeling. I felt safe even if it was unreasonable. Stairs can be scary, but at least I could see everything in front of me. Of course I couldn't avoid the elevator forever. The next night I was too tired to take the stairs again. My knees were a bit sore, so this time I took the service elevator. It went straight down to the ground floor without stopping. I still felt nervous, but nothing unusual happened. The following week I was working late again, but I kept noticing that I was startled when the elevator slowed down. If it stopped on a floor I would get a spike of adrenaline, in case the doors opened onto a dark hallway, but usually they opened onto a floor with lights and occasionally a doorman would. Maybe on those nights quiet but still predictable. I can't forget the memory of that night. The hallway was dark, the reflection, it's still in my mind. Sometimes I find myself glancing at the reflective wall, half expecting to see someone behind me. My posture changes. I started standing closer to the elevator doors so I could see the entire elevator behind me. I realize I'm acting paranoid, but I can't bear to face the metal wall again. I keep thinking, if I see that silhouette again. About 2 weeks later the elevator stops at a floor that looks almost dark. The overhead lights are dim as if they're just emergency lights. I tense up, the door slides open and I see maybe a light flickering in the hallway that looks deserted. No one is in. I keep pressing the close button. My hands are shaking as the door closes. I brace myself and look at the reflection. It's just me, no one else. I breathe a sigh of relief, but my heart is still pounding. After a month of nights like that I start planning to leave before it's too late. If I leave before 8 p.m. I can still use the elevator socially. Sometimes I manage, but when I don't I either force myself down the service elevator or take the stairs if I'm not too tired. I finally told a coworker about it. He wasn't the type to laugh at me. I explained I saw something in the reflection of the elevator. He asked, "Did you see someone come in behind you?" I said no, and He just patted me on the shoulder and said, "Look mate, probably just tired, that building is old, the service elevator is old, weird things happen." He didn't make a big deal about it, which made me feel less crazy every time I had to work late. I remember that night. The memory comes back every time I press the elevator button. I think of that dark floor, the doors opening, the stuffy air, and then that sudden moment I see a figure behind me in the reflection. It feels real, but when I turn around there's no one, there's no sound, no sense of someone else present. I'm in alone, but I know I saw someone even for a second. Maybe I fooled my eyes because of the reflection of the metal or the overhead light. Our minds can do strange things, especially when we are alone in stressful situations. I find that realistic for some people. First reason is that some floors in this building are hardly used at night, so they don't turn on the main lights there if the elevator stops. It's just a dark empty space. Secondly, the reflection in those metal walls can be misleading. The shape of the elevator can distort any movement. And thirdly, sometimes strange things happen that we can't easily explain. It doesn't mean it's supernatural. It could be coincidence, electrical fault, or just me working too hard. I'm not saying I believe I'm haunted, I just know that experience left me shocked. Since then, I've mostly stayed away from that elevator. After work I either leave earlier or try and take the stairs. I still work in the same building. I see the same hallways and the same sign that says social elevators will be turned off after 8 p.m. But every time I have to take the service elevator late at night, I feel my chest tighten. I feel a little scared before you said, asked me if I should stop or continue. I was worried that if I stopped I might regret it, but part of me felt guilty at the thought of ignoring someone who might be in trouble. Eventually my fear overcame all my worries. I gently pressed the accelerator and the car started moving past him. I couldn't take my eyes off him like a statue. Then as soon as the front of my car was parallel to him, he tilted his head slightly as if he was judging me. My chest tightened so much I could hardly breathe. The whole moment felt heavy and dense, like time had slowed down. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. I continued to move forward and my car had completely passed him. I glanced in the rear view mirror. Immediately my heart was pounding. The headlights illuminated the tree trunks, the grass by the road, and a small section of hedge. The man was gone. That was what made me shiver. One moment he was there, the next moment the place looked empty. I craned my neck trying to catch any movement behind me, but I saw nothing but the faint outline of a tree. A shiver ran down my arm. I took a few shaky breaths. My mind tried to make sense of it. Logically, maybe he was out of sight, or maybe I just couldn't see him in the dark, but the suddenness of everything being there for a second then gone was almost impossible. At the same time I knew there was no evidence of anything beyond that strangeness. That didn't mean he was gone, but it definitely was. I kept driving, pressing the accelerator a little harder than usual. My eyes kept glancing towards the rear view mirror even though I wasn't sure what I expected to see. My palms were slippery on the steering wheel. I wiped one hand on my pants, then switched hands and did the same. The same with the other. My breathing was rapid and my pulse was pounding in my ears. I forced myself to slow my breathing by counting in my head. The road continued through more fields and patches of trees. I passed a rusty barn, then a small cluster of sheds near the driveway, all of them dark and quiet. The tension in my chest, it doesn't go away. I turn on the cabin light for a second just to feel less alone. After a few seconds I turn it back off because it makes it hard to see outside. I keep thinking about what I just saw. The man was standing. His clothes looked like they had been dragged across the ground and his eyes looked so intense. I tried to reason maybe he was just a tramp or a lost person, but why was he staring like that? Why was he walking towards me like he wanted to stop me but didn't signal for help? I got no answer. About 10 minutes later I came to a small gas station. It was closed, but the parking lot had a few vending machines. I drove and parked under a dim overhead light and turned off the engine. I sat there for a minute panting, trying to get the feeling over the fluorescent lights, the buzzing and moths fluttering around. I realized I was hungry, but my nerves were so sensitive I didn't have any appetite. I just wanted to calm down. I climbed out of the car and walked away. Walked to the vending machine and grab a bottle of water. The air outside is damp and cool and I notice my hands are shaking a little. As I unscrew the cap I take a long sip. The water feels good but my stomach is still rumbling. I look back at the road, half expecting to see a shadowy figure appear. There is nothing there. The only sounds are insects and the buzzing of the vending machine. After a few minutes I get back in the car and start the engine. I take off down the highway again, determined to put more distance between me and that stretch of road. I try to find a radio station with talk shows or some music to keep My mind focused on normal things. The interference is strong, but I eventually find a weak signal playing some old rock songs. The rest of the trip is tense, but I don't see anyone else on the side of the road. Every time I turn a corner I find myself bracing myself for a shadow to appear. It doesn't happen though. Eventually farmland gives way to a few scattered houses and a small intersection. There were flashing traffic lights. As I reached that intersection, I felt relieved, my body relaxed a little and I realized how stiff my shoulders were. I got home around midnight. The first thing I did was lock my car and check my windows. I usually don't worry too much, but that night, I felt the need to be sure. When I got in, I kicked off my shoes, put my luggage down and went straight to the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water on my skin helped me feel calmer. I saw my reflection in the mirror and saw that I looked very confused. My eyes were wide open, my face was a little pale. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept imagining the man walking out towards my car, his eyes staring at me. I woke up with a start after a few. Now my heart is pounding. The next day I got up early, made some coffee and tried to forget about it. I thought it was just one of those weird experiences on the road. Maybe I should call the local police station to report a suspicious person, but I didn't have a license plate or anything to give them, and he didn't actually commit a crime. He was just there and then he wasn't there. For the next few weeks I avoided that route. At night if I had to go to work I chose another route even if it was longer, but eventually circumstances forced me to drive that long again. This time I left earlier in the afternoon so I still had some daylight. As I went through the whole driveway I was on the verge. My stomach was tight and my hands couldn't relax on the wheel. As I got closer to where the sun was setting behind the horizon, but there was still enough light to see the tree, I slowed down and glanced to the right of the road. There was no one there. The tree looked normal. The fence had the same farmland. The other side of this place looks empty, but my heart is pounding. I feel a layer of sweat on my forehead. Despite the comfortable temperature my legs are tense and my foot hovers over the accelerator pedal ready to accelerate. If I catch a glimpse of anything unusual, nothing happens. I pass by that spot keeping pace and finally letting out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding my breath. I've passed that spot a few more times since then. I never saw that man again, but each time my pulse quickens and I feel a cold feeling in my gut. It doesn't make sense, but my mind pulls me back to that night. I still picture him standing there covered in grime. Eyes locked on my headlights. I replay the moment he stepped forward and I wonder what his intentions were. If I stopped, would he ask for help or would things have gone differently? I have no answers. All I have is the memory of that strange encounter in the middle of nowhere. At least to me, I felt the tension in my bones. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Nothing supernatural. It was just a man, but there was something about him that was off. That was what made it so scary. It was a normal road, a normal night, but I still shiver when I think about it. My hands get wet remembering the way he looked at me. Sometimes people ask me why I get so restless on country roads. I don't usually share this story because it sounds like nothing happened, but it was exactly that. It was just a person standing next to a tree at night, but it made me feel like I was in serious danger. I try not to think about it anymore. I'm still wary whenever I pass that area. If I see someone standing on the side of the road I slow down enough to get a better look, but I rarely stop. Maybe it's selfish, but I don't want to have to find out the truth the hard way. If my intuition is right, that night basically no dramatic ending at all. I got home safe and I never found out who he was or what he wanted. All I know is that his eyes seemed to cut straight through the darkness and locked onto me. The fear I felt was so pure and immediate. That feeling hasn't faded even now. If I close my eyes and picture that spot on the freeway, I can almost feel my heart rate increase again. Maybe it was just a random guy, or maybe it was something else. There was something else going on. I'll never really know, but that's why it felt so real, so vivid. There were no flashing lights or other signs, just a man on the side of the road. That was all it took to shock me more than I'd like to admit. I never thought a few words on a wall could shock me, but I was wrong. The first day I walked into that basement studio I felt sure I had found a hidden gem there, very quiet with thick walls and flowers blocking out the noise of the city. I wanted a space to practice and record, and it seemed perfect. Then I found those messages and everything changed. I will walk you through step by step what happened the way I remember. I am not adding any fancy decorations or insights. I will just tell you what I did, what I saw, and how I felt at the time. I discovered this place through an online ad. The ad showed a few Photos of a cramped but comfortable room with exposed pipes on the ceiling and foam panels on some of the walls. The ad mentioned good acoustics, cheap rent, and no neighbors complaining about noise. I used to have a small home studio before, but my neighbors were always annoyed if I recorded late. Strong hallway. There are a few doors on the left, all closed, and pipes running along the ceiling. We stopped at the last door. Inside it wasn't pretty, but there was enough room for my stuff. The foam panels on the walls were torn up a little and a few cables were in the corner. There was a single overhead light with a fluorescent tube flickering. The manager said I could replace it if I wanted to. I would tap my foot on the concrete floor. Solid sound didn't travel far. This was exactly what I needed. I signed the lease a few days later. The price was low and the manager seemed happy to finally have someone reuse the studio. He told me it had been empty for months, which made it didn't feel like a glamorous place, and it probably took a specific type of tenant to want a studio in the basement. I liked the isolation. On my first official day as a tenant, I took the monitor and a few instruments downstairs. I also took cleaning supplies. The walls looked dirty and the floors needed to be cleaned. Cleaning. I wanted to get everything in order away, so I put my stuff down and knelt down to dust the corners of the room. I remember hearing my breathing, a slight echo. It was a small space, but you could feel the echo. I liked how real it felt. Studio environment. I was cleaning the wall near the door when I saw those words written in thin black marker on one side, about knee high. Did you hear his voice? At first I thought it was just some leftover graffiti. I squinted at it and noticed the letters were shaky, like someone had written them in a hurry. It looked more like a question than a random phrase. I ignored it. I saw weirder things in the rehearsal space. People like to write nonsense on the walls. It didn't scare me, but it just felt weird. But I focused on cleaning later. A few hours later I had dusted off most of the dust. I set my monitors up on a sturdy table I had brought and plugged them in. I put my mic stand in a corner and put some cables in. I checked everything out. The place has good acoustics as advertised. The overhead light still flickers occasionally. I tried tapping on the furniture, but that didn't help. I figured maybe I'd replace it later or bring a lamp. I spent the next few days bringing in more instruments. By the end of the week I had everything: a keyboard, a couple of guitars, a small drum machine, and some chairs. The environment was very quiet except the slight noise from the ventilation ducts was from the caretaker, not the manager, but a young man in overalls who passed by a few times. He was usually cleaning the hallways or checking the ducts. He barely said anything, just nodded at me. Then the night I stayed late for the test recording, the building was mostly empty after 7 p.m. I got there around 6 a.m., set up the mic and started playing some loops. I didn't notice anything strange for about an hour. I recorded a simple guitar part and tried out some lines. I stopped to listen back through my headphones, and that's when I realized how quiet the hallway was, which isn't unusual, but it was heavy at around 8:30 p.m. I started packing. I walked towards the wall with the lights going out one by one, the overhead light flickering and noisy. I flipped the switch and the room darkened, leaving a soft glow from the hallway light. As I went to unplug my device, I noticed something on the floor near the desk. I knelt down with a red marker. The words "He saw you." They were almost the size of the black letters on the wall. 0. My first reaction was confusion, then it suddenly spiked panic. My chest tightened and my heart was pounding. I looked around, but I was alone. I picked up a nearby rag and some spray cleaner, trying to wipe it off. The red marker smudged a little but didn't come off. My hands shaking, and I felt this a feeling of being watched, like I wasn't alone in that basement. I rubbed harder, but the stain didn't completely go away. I picked up my phone and used the flashlight to scan the rest of the floor. I didn't see any other messages. I checked the corners under the desk behind my equipment. Nothing else was there. I didn't hear any footsteps or voices. The caretaker hadn't been in all that time. As far as I knew. I felt my pulse quicken. I was breathing hard and my palms were sweaty. I decided to get out of there. I turned off all the other lights, locked the door, and rushed up stairs. I didn't see anyone in the hallway or lobby. The building seemed deserted that night. I didn't sleep well. I tried to tell myself it was just some graffiti left, but I couldn't shake the thought that it looked new, as if someone had done it recently. The next day, in the morning, I came back earlier than usual. I saw the caretaker around. The caretaker looked confused when I mentioned the writing. He just shrugged and said he didn't see or hear anything. I tried scrubbing the black messages on the wall, faded a bit, but the words were still visible. The red marker on the floor looked stubborn like it had stained the concrete. I knelt down and used a harder sponge, but it only blurred the edges of the letters. The shapes were still there. He saw my friend. I felt restless the whole time. Every sound in the hallway startled me. My mind started to wander. Who was he? Why would someone write like that? For the next few days I was busy with my music. I tried to ignore the marks, but they were always in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I moved my device so I didn't have to look at the writing on the floor. Other times I taped a piece of cardboard over the words on the wall, but I knew they were still there. The caretaker's reassurance didn't do much for me. I kept thinking someone had a key or someone that was sneaking in. Whenever I took an afternoon off, I decided to talk to the building manager again. I went upstairs. Found him in the small office next to the lobby. I told him about the article. He seemed surprised but calm. He said the last tenant was a musician, but that guy left months ago. He never complained or mentioned anything strange. The manager also insisted no one else had rented the space, since he offered to lend me some paint to cover up the graffiti if I was offended. That's when I realized I was alone. No big explanation, just me and those words. I painted over the writing on the wall with a small can of white paint, mostly covering the black letters, but I could still see a faint outline if I looked closely. The FL floor was a bigger problem. I tried painting it too, but the red marker had soaked through first coat of paint. I did a second coat, although there is still a slight shadow of the letters. If the light hits at the right angle, my nerves are on edge every time I walk into that place at night. The basement is colder. I started hearing these soft noises, the creaking in the pipes. The caretaker told me it was normal, just water still running. Whenever I heard them, my stomach would turn and I would stop whatever I was doing to listen. I would wait for any sign of someone lurking around. Sometimes I would open the door to the hallway just to check no one was there. Every time the messages messed with my head. They were simple, but they fueled my imagination. Have you heard his voice? He seen you? It was like a warning or a question, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I should be worried about a stalker or if it was just random rubies. I tried to focus on the music, but the stress made it hard to concentrate. My recording sounded lifeless. My mind wasn't in the right place. After a month I started dreading my visits. That basement smell made me feel claustrophobic. I noticed every flicker of the overhead lights. I found myself glancing over my shoulder. Even when the caretaker was nearby, I felt exposed, like the walls had eyes. I hated this. Feel like I would rent this space to create, not stress about strangers or mysterious notes. One evening I decided I had had enough. I packed my main gear, guitar, microphone, a small mixer. I left some cheaper stuff I planned to get back. My hands were shaking because I carried the boxes up the stairs. I kept listening for footsteps behind me. My scalp tingled every time I heard the echo of my own footsteps. When I reached the lobby, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The next morning I canceled the lease. I told the building manager I had found another location that fit my schedule. Better he didn't push it. He just said he understood and he would keep my deposit if I left before the end of the contract. I accepted that. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to get out of there. I went back one last time to get the rest of my stuff. The caretaker saw me in the hallway and asked if there was a problem. I said I just needed another space with more air. He nodded like he had heard that reason 100 times. I wondered if he suspected the real reason, but I didn't want to explain the messages again. I wanted to be done. As I walked into the office, I saw the faint marks on the wall where I had painted them were almost unreadable now. The floor was covered with an old rug I had laid down. I folded the rug up and tucked it underneath. I caught a glimpse of the faint red letters one more time. It made my heart pound again. Hurriedly, as I carried the last box out, I took one last look at the empty room. The overhead light flickered. A low hum filled the silence. The smell of damp concrete lingered. My face was hot and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I locked the door behind me, walked away feeling relieved. No more scribbled words, no more strange chills, no more musty basement again. I told myself it was all just random vandalism by a previous tenant. Maybe some stressed out musician wrote nonsense on the wall. That explanation made sense. The manager said no one else was there, so maybe it was old, maybe it was ignored, until I realized the fear came from not knowing it was it. But still, every time I remember that red phrase, I feel a knot in my stomach. He saw you. I can't explain why it bothered me so much, but it saw me. Never went back to that building. I don't have any ghost stories or evidence of intruders, maybe just the graffiti left behind, but I still remember the feeling of panic. My palms were sweaty, the way my eyes glanced, every shadow felt real to me, and that was enough to make me leave. That's my story. No dramatic ending, no revelation, just a studio in the basement, weird words on the wall, and I walked away before anything worse happened. Some people might laugh at that, but I don't care. I still don't want to see those words again. I still remember that night with Absolute clarity. We were on our way home from a barbecue. It was almost midnight and there were no street lights around, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart was still pounding from the noise and joy at the party, but there was also something else that I couldn't explain. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the asphalt seemed endless and I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. My name is Mark, I was driving my old car, a late 90s model. It had done some mileage but it had never given me serious problems. I had recently changed the battery and had the alternator checked a few months before. I trusted that car. It got me through sea and a few road trips without much trouble that night, although it would show a side that I hadn't seen. My friends Alex and John were with me, Alex in the front passenger seat, John in the back. The three of us had spent the day at a friend's house having a barbecue. We had eaten too much and probably had more to drink than we should have, but I felt stable enough to drive. I didn't. Tipsy, I was just tired. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard and it read 11:48 p.m. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I could smell the lingering smoke from the grill on my clothes. The windows were rolled up and the cabin felt a little stuffy. I turned on the aircon, but it only blew out moderately cool air. After a while Alex started talking. He told a joke about one of our acquaintances, a guy we all knew from town. This acquaintance was known to be very religious. He always carried a small religious book in his pocket and he didn't drink or party. Alex said something like, I bet he would quote verses to us if he was there tonight. I laughed a little. John chuckled from the back seat. We didn't mean it in a bad way, just teasing. But then Alex pushed it further. He started mocking the friend's beliefs, imitating his seriousness. The tone. We all laughed, but deep down inside I felt a little uncomfortable, even though right then, maybe in the middle of Alex's joke, there was something had happened to the car lights. Overhead lights flickering even though it was not on, was set to door. We were driving home from a gathering, and John made a joke about a friend believing in premonitions. The group laughed, but as soon as the word premonitions was uttered, the dashboard lights flickered. The radio screen went black for a second, the air conditioner fan dimmed, and the headlights dimmed so much that the road ahead almost disappeared. A shiver ran down my spine. Alex gripped the armrest, and John was silent. I tried to act calm, but I couldn't deny the unease. There was no curb or gas station in sight, so I decided to keep driving. No one said anything. The engine hummed steadily, but I was aware of every little sound, the squeal of the accelerator, the rattle of the air conditioner vents. My heart was beating faster than usual, my mind stuck in the moment. After a few minutes of silence, Alex said, "This is weird. It happened right when we were joking about it." I shrugged, trying to say it was a coincidence, but I didn't believe it myself. John muttered, "That's weird." He seemed shaken, despite trying to sound tough. Alex joked again, "Is God punishing us?" He laughed, but his tone was strained. At that moment, the car shook violently. The headlights were so dim I thought we'd lost them. The engine wheezed as if it were about to die, the dashboard went dark, save for the faint glow of the hazard lights. I gripped the wheel, my eyes glued to the darkness ahead. Sweat poured down my forehead. Alex cursed, and John shouted, "What the hell?" Then everything went back to normal. The engine started up again, the headlights came on, the dashboard flickered and stabilized. I gasped, my hands shaking as I reached for the water bottle. "That's enough," I said. "No more jokes about that." Alex and John fell silent, as if in tacit agreement. Maybe the car had just had an electrical fault, but the coincidence was too perfect. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but part of me couldn't deny the unsettling feeling. We drove on in silence. The lights stopped flashing, the engine ran smoothly, everything seemed back to normal. When I saw the sign for the main highway, I breathed a sigh of relief. There were finally streetlights, a few other cars around. A sense of security returned. We started talking about random things, sports, recent games, avoiding any topics related to religion or belief. I dropped John off first, near his quiet neighborhood, hoping nothing strange would happen. Old houses. I waited until he got in the front door, then I drove Alex to his house. On the way to Alex's house we barely spoke. I think we were both replaying the drive in our minds. I remember looking at him and seeing the tension in his jaw. He gave me money for gas and I waved, saying, "Don't worry." I was still confused. After dropping him off I went home, parked the car and sat there for a minute before getting in. I was sweating and my heart was still pounding. I locked the door feeling uncertain. The next morning I woke up early. I felt like I needed to figure out what was wrong. I took the car to a local mechanic, a guy called Rick I had known for years. I explained the symptoms. The dashboard lights were flashing, the headlights were dim, the engine was almost dead. I told him the battery and alternator were pretty new. He opened the hood and checked the cables, tested the electrical system, ran diagnostics. After an hour he said he didn't found any problems, everything seemed fine, no error codes, no loose wires, no weird voltage drops. He shrugged and said maybe a one-time glitch. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I had to accept it. I drove the car that day around town trying to get it to flash again. I turned on all the lights, the AC started, the music loud, nothing happened, it ran perfectly. I called Alex and John afterwards. They both asked if I found any problems. I told them no, we joked about it but we avoided it. The religious angle, I just felt weird mentioning it, as if we didn't want to tempt fate again. To this day the car hasn't had the exact same problem. It's been years and I still can't explain it. I've changed a few parts since then, spark plugs, a belt, some filters, but never fixed any wiring issues, as no one found any. When I mentioned it to people, they said it sounded like an electrical short or maybe a problem with the ignition system, but no one could explain why it fit our jokes the way it sometimes happened late at night. I replayed it in my head. We were on that dark road, far away from people, talking about something we shouldn't have. Every time we pushed that line the lights went out, then when we stopped the car was running perfectly. Maybe it was a weird coincidence or a random electrical problem due to vibration whenever we talked too loud, but it was consistent enough to freak us out. Why was it realistic? Because every part of it could be a mechanical problem. Sometimes the wiring could be broken, a connection could be loose, maybe a small short had shoved when we talked or moved in the seat. No ghosts, no shadows, no final explosion, no one died, but the coincidence made me feel it felt like something wanted us to stop talking. Even after all these years, I still don't have a better explanation for it. It was the wiring, maybe something else. All I know is that it happened and I don't want to repeat that experiment. I've learned to be careful with what I say, especially on deserted streets late at night. I came home that night feeling like a dead battery. I had worked a long shift, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. I pushed open the door to my small apartment and threw the key on the kitchen counter. It was cramped with only one bedroom and a small living room attached to the kitchen plus a bathroom in the corner. I liked it because it was cheap and close to my work and I usually didn't have to share it with anyone. I found the quiet relaxing that night, even though something was wrong. As soon as I walked in I locked the front door out of habit. The click of the latch gave me a little comfort and I told myself that tiredness is playing tricks on me. The living room is the size of a walk-in closet. I have a small couch against one wall, a TV opposite, and barely enough room for a coffee table. The kitchen is a couple of cabinets, a stove and a fridge all lined up together. The wall. This place smells old, like I need to open a window, but I'm too tired to care. My bedroom is to the right, separated by a thin door that I usually leave open. The bathroom is a small space on the other side with a narrow shower stall, a toilet and a small sink. Soon after I throw my coat on the couch, take off my shoes and trudge straight into the bathroom. I'm too tired to do anything else. I turn on the shower, adjust the temperature until it's as hot as it can get and step into the water. The steam blurs my vision and for a second I close my eyes. The dull ache in my shoulder starts to ease. I let the water hit my back and try to think of something that doesn't. Bedroom floor. My eyes widened and I stared at the bathroom tiles. My first thought was that maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking around, but the footsteps sounded so close it felt like they were just a few feet away. Right in my bedroom I reached into the faucet and turned off the water, leaving me completely silent. Small drops of water dripping from my hair onto the bathroom floor. I listened, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard another soft noise like a creak on an old floorboard. I swallowed. My throat suddenly went dry and my heart was pounding. Speeding up I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist and walked towards the bathroom door. I hesitated, my hands were shaking and I realized I was standing there in a small bathroom with only a locked wooden door between me and whoever might be out there. I flipped the bathroom door locked. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Hello, I called out. My voice sounded weak. I cleared my throat and tried again a little louder. Someone was silent. I pressed my ear to the door, but all that I can hear my own breathing. My hair is dripping. Water falls to the floor. After maybe half a minute I decide to open the door. I have no weapon and I'm not even wearing pants, but I think if there is someone inside it's better to face them right away because waiting is worse for my nerves. I turn the lock, turn the knob and open the door a crack. I glance into my bedroom. My lights are off and the room is dark except for the faint glow from the hallway light. I poke my head out and scan the room. My bed is unmade. The pillows are piled up. My wardrobe door is partially open, but that's normal because it never latches. Yes, everything looks the same as when I left that morning. I walk into the bedroom. My footsteps hit the carpet because my feet are still wet. I check the wardrobe first, yank the door open. There's nothing inside but wrinkled shirts and my old shoes. Then I tiptoe to the corner between the bed and the wall. Although there's barely enough room for a person to hide, I bent down to look under the bed, only to find a few cardboard boxes and some dust. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. I kept reminding myself that I lived alone, no one else had a key. I walked into the living room, my wet feet leaving marks on the hardwood floor. My couch was empty. The small kitchen was exactly as I had left it, although the fridge was humming as usual. I checked. The apartment door was still locked from the inside. I felt my shoulders relax a little. I told myself that I must have imagined it, or maybe it was the pipes that were wide open. Old buildings always do that, especially when the weather changes. The thing is, I knew the pipes were clanging or banging, not the slow, deliberate footsteps. But I tried to brush myself off. I dried myself off in the bedroom, put on sweatpants and a t-shirt and went back to the kitchen to heat up a can of soup. I still felt tense, but I tried to focus on the task service. I turn on the stove, pour soup into a small pot and stare at it while it heats. The silence in the apartment heavier than usual. I turn on the TV in the living room just loud enough to cover the silence. Some random late night show is on the screen. I glance, but can't focus. My mind keeps going back to those footsteps. After my soup is done, I slurp it up standing at the counter. I don't want to sit. I can't sit. I keep looking over my shoulder at the bedroom. It's pitch black. The only light is the dim light from the living room lamp that shines halfway up the door. I think about turning on the bedroom light, but I feel a little silly. If I'm dealing with an overactive imagination, then going around turning on every light still doesn't make any sense. I can't shake the anxiety. After washing the dishes, I check the apartment one more time. I look in the bathroom that juts out behind the shower curtain. I check under the sink. Even though no one can get in there, I look under the sofa. I glance at the small coat closet near the front door. No anything. I feel a little better. I lock the door from the inside, then go to bed. It's only about 10:30 p.m. but I'm so tired. My body is exhausted from work. I turn off the living room light so the apartment is dark except for the faint light of the street light through the bedroom window. I lie on the pull-out bed, cover up to chest and close eyes for a while. I just listen to the faint sound of cars outside in the distance, the deep voices of neighbors, and the occasional honk from the street. Slowly, I start to relax. Then just as I am half awake and half asleep, I hear those footsteps again. It sounds right outside my bedroom door. My eyes widen and my breathing speeds up. There are 2 steps, then stop, then 2 more steps, like someone is walking. My body goes cold. I slowly sit up in bed, trying not to make any sudden noises. The bedroom door is open so I can see the shape of the hallway. Nothing is moving there. My heart is pounding really loud. I think maybe it is an echo. The footsteps this time are louder. I fumble for my phone on the nightstand and turn on the screen to light up the area. I can't see anything in the door frame. My hands are shaking so much I almost drop my phone. I am debating whether to call the police, but what am I going to say? I hear footsteps, but no one is here. They will come. And looking around, probably finding nothing, I slide out of bed, trying to be as quiet as possible. My bare feet hit the cold floor. I gripped the phone and headed towards the bedroom door. Opening, my knees felt weak. I looked into the hallway. It was dark and I could only see the shapes of the furniture in the living room. I walked slowly and carefully into the hallway. The air was cold. I listened, holding my breath. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. I turned on the lights. The hallway, the living room looked empty. The front door was still closed. I tiptoed through the living room, checking every corner. I stood there for a minute, phone in hand. I scanned the space. Nothing. I realized I was sweating even though the apartment was cool. My face was red and my mouth was dry. I swallowed and tried to calm down. I walked to the door and opened it quickly, expecting to see someone in the hallway outside. No one was there. The hallway was empty. The lights were dim. I Stuck my head out and looked both ways silent. I close the door, lock up, and do my stupid habit of checking behind the couch, inside the bathroom closet, under the bed. Everything is empty. When I finally crawl back into bed, it's almost midnight. I turn off the bedroom light. Stare at the ceiling and wait. My whole body tenses like a coiled spring every time a pipe squeaks or the fridge clicks. I'm startled. I find myself hyperventilating, so I force myself to breathe slowly. My head is spinning with thoughts. Have I locked the windows? Has no one snuck in yet? Earlier in the day I lose my mind from exhaustion. I lay there for hours unable to sleep. Every time I start to fall asleep I startle awake thinking I hear a stream or a soft noise. Doesn't help when the building makes random noises. Sometimes the building is old and the walls are thin. I'm on the second floor, so sometimes I can hear the guy upstairs, but the footsteps I hear seem to be in my house, not upstairs. I can't explain it. Around 3 a.m. I wake up, put on slippers, and walking around the apartment, I turn on the living room light. I turn on the TV and the first random show that comes on is some commercial for kitchen appliances. I stare without really understanding. I just need the occasional distraction. I turn the TV off and don't listen to anything. Then I turn it back on. After a while, my eyes start to burn with fatigue. By 4, I'm so tired my head keeps falling forward. I decide to try sleeping on the couch. I grab a thin blanket from the bed and lie down on the couch, leaving the living room light on. I face the bedroom door, keeping it in my line of sight. The hallway is still lit, so if something moves in there I hope I'll see it. I close my eyes and try to relax. My back starts to ache from the couch, but I'm too tired to care. I may have dozed off for 20 minutes or so, but around 4:30 I hear light footsteps in the bedroom again. My eyes snap open. The TV is still on with the volume low. The hallway light cast a weak beam of light on the bedroom door. I didn't see any movement, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My eyes started to tear up from the tension. My heart was pounding in my chest. I lay still on the couch, one hand clutching the blanket, the other holding the phone. I lay there motionless for at least 10 minutes, no more noise. Finally I mustered up the courage to get up and check the bedroom again. The room was exactly as before, empty. The sheets and pillows were all messed up on the bed and I could smell my own sweat on the pillow. I looked in every corner, shook the curtains, opened the closet and almost stuck my head in nothing. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the TV on and the lights on. No more footsteps, or if I did I probably muted them. The next morning I was devastated. My eyes were bloodshot and my neck was stiff. I walked around checking everything, but everything was normal. No signs of forced entry, no random objects moving, no footprints on the floor. Just my own footprints from earlier. It was one of those experiences that made my mind spin. Maybe it was the pipes, or maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking in some sort of way that fooled my ears. Maybe the floor was expanding with the temperature change. No proof anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those footsteps were in my bedroom and not upstairs. I had no reason to believe in anything supernatural, but I couldn't explain it either. That's why it felt so real. I was there, I heard it, and I couldn't find anything else. Explanation: I had no visitors that night and also no roommates. I heard those footsteps more than once. I eventually chalked it up to building noise or some kind of coincidence, but I will never forget how my heart pounded when I heard someone walk into my bedroom. I have had sleepless nights before, but that night was a class apart. It felt like I was living in someone else's space, or they were living in mine, and I couldn't see them. Even now I still think about it sometimes, especially when I get home late and the apartment is dark and quiet. I guess you never really know all the sounds an old building can make, or maybe you do and you try to ignore them, but that night there was no way to ignore anything. It was just a few feet away and kept me awake until the sun came up. I drove into that area expecting a quiet drive and a few photos. Creepy. I never thought I will end up alone in the dark listening to the whistle as it winds around my bones. I am an amateur photographer who pursues ghost rumors and strange happenings in my spare time. I often see old drafty houses or strange lights. This time it was different. The land was empty, the sky was vast and the air was holding its breath. The first night when I heard the whistle outside my tent, I realized I was in a place that did not follow the usual rules. I arrived in the afternoon on a dusty road that seemed to stretch on forever. Pale green fields and dotted with small rocks stretched out on both sides. There were no neighbors, no farms, no animals, just the wind blowing through the tall grass. The only signs of life I noticed were a few brown bushes and maybe a hawk or two circling overhead. The sun was high in the sky and the heat radiated from the earth in waves. I felt myself sweating The smell gathered around my neck even with the window down. I drove looking for a good spot to set up camp. My goal was simple. I wanted to photograph any signs of the spirit that was rumored to whistle at night. The locals in the nearest town had warned me that they said whistle lure people away from safety or sometimes flag them down, but they had no details. They just shrugged and shook their heads. When I asked for more information, they told me no one had ever been out there for so long. I thought it was like an old story retold for tourist purposes, so I tried to act normal. When inside I was excited. I found a small clearing near a group of weathered boulders. Those rocks looked as if they had been there forever, formed by the strong winds that never seemed to stop. I parked near them and pitched my tent in the shade. The wind picked up a bit, making the tall grass roll like a slow wave on the car radio. Can't find any channels. I try my phone, but no signal. I decide to accept the isolation. The first day passes calmly. I walk around with my camera taking pictures of the landscape. Nothing unusual happened. The sun is bright and the temperature makes the horizon sparkle. I look for traces of footprints or old campsites, but all I see are scattered rocks, some broken branches and endless grass. Late afternoon, the wind starts to cool. I take out a small camping stove and heat some tin soup. I watch the sun set behind the hills. The color in the sky looks clear and sharp with streaks of orange and red. I turn on my flashlight and sit in the tent ready to wait. My camera has a new battery charged and I have a voice recorder. In case facing the night starts to get quiet. I hear the crickets chirping echoing across the vast expanse. I move around the rocks and scan the horizon. I see nothing. The grass, rocks and a faint line of hills in the distance. The whistle fades then starts again. It must be getting closer. My skin tingles. I try to hold my breath. Calm down. I raise my camera and take a few pictures, hoping the flash might catch something. I wait. I feel the hair on my arms stand up. Then the whistle stops. Silence except for my own breathing. After a while I return to my tent feeling restless. I decide to jot down a few notes in my voice recorder. As I speak I notice my voice shaking. My neck stiffens and my stomach churns with tension. I finally fall asleep. The next morning I wake up with a warm ray of sunshine on my face. It feels so strange, as if I imagined the whole thing. The day is normal again. The sky is blue and the grass sways gently. I have a quick breakfast and play back my voice recorder. I hear my own voice describing the whistle, but in reality I couldn't hear it. It was missing from the recording, which struck me as strange. There is often background noise, even if faint. I tried to shake off my frustration and decided to explore further on foot. I walked for about an hour towards the low hill carrying my camera and some water. The landscape didn't change much, all grass and rocks. The wind touched everything. I was always alert, scanning the horizon for any people or animals. At one point I spotted a couple of large birds in the distance, but that was all over by midday. I rested and had a drink near a cluster of rocks. I noticed some shallow scratches on the rocks like old carvings, but they looked natural. The sun was very strong, so I returned to camp late in the afternoon. The clouds were drifting in the wind, which accelerated, making the tent flaps creak. I could feel the tension in the air, as if a storm was about to hit. I decided to set up my tripod and see if I could get any shots of the landscape under the approaching clouds. Close as I focus my camera, my hands are shaking a little. I actually find myself thinking about the siren the night before and feeling uneasy about the hours ahead. As darkness falls I sit on a camping stool outside my tent. I turn off the flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the moonlit plain. My heart beats faster as time passes. I am waiting for that siren. I feel exposed in the open space, but I want a clear view of whatever may be coming. For a while nothing happens. The wind rustles through the grass and I hear some creaks far away from the rocks. Then I notice a faint sound drifting on the wind. It is the same siren, steady, a little deeper this time. My jaw is clenched. I try to stay calm. I pick up my camera and point it towards the sound, but I can't see the movement. The siren gets louder and it changes pitch as if it is reacting to my presence. I stand up and walk out of the tent. My body feels stiff, pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to speak loudly, asking who was there. My voice broke. The siren stopped, then started again, almost cheerfully. I took a few steps forward, scanning the horizon. That's when I noticed a shape. It was barely visible, a darker outline in the night. It was standing near a small hill, maybe 100 yards away. It looked tall and still. My fingers felt cold even though the air was still warm. I adjusted the camera lens and took a few pictures. My breath caught in my throat when I realized the figure was wearing a hood. I couldn't see a face, no details, just a hooded shape motionless in the moonlight. The siren drifted across the distance gently but persistently. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to record it, so I tried to get closer, keeping my camera ready. I walked slowly, my shoes crunched on dry ground. I turned off the flashlight because I didn't want to startle anything out there. The figure didn't move, but the siren never did stop. I get closer until I'm maybe 50 yards away, and then the wind blows, the grass bends the other way, and I lose sight of that figure for a second. When I look back, it's gone. The whistle, however, continues. My heart is pounding so hard I think I might pass out. I sweep the flashlight across the grass and stones. Is nothing. I want to run back to the tent, but I don't want to turn my back on that place. The whistle starts to fade, then sounds again behind me. I turn around. Flashlights all around, whizzing across the field, but no one there. I feel dizzy. I force myself to go back to the campsite. Once I'm in the tent, I fumble for the recorder. My mouth is dry and my hands are shaking. My scalp is tight and my shoulders ache from the tension. I've recorded a few words to describe what. No trace of footprints or disturbed grass. I looked through the camera's memory card. Most of the photos were just empty fields, but in 3 of them I saw a shadowy figure at the edge of the frame, definitely a hooded figure. No face, just a shape. This gave me the creeps, but it also proved that I wasn't imagining things. I spent the rest of the day walking around the campsite, unsure whether to leave or stay another night. I kept telling myself I had come here to photograph something unusual, and now I still had a chance, but my gut was still twisting. Something wasn't right about this place. That afternoon I forced myself to explore again. I walked in a wider circle looking for footprints or any trace of a trail. I found some flattened patches of grass, but they looked like places where the wind had flattened them. Around some rocks, I saw worn tracks. They didn't look like words or symbols, more like random scratches. I took pictures of everything I found, although not much. As it was dark, I boiled some water for coffee and tried to concentrate, thinking about my plan. If the siren sounded, I considered turning on all the lights, playing loud music from the car, or even honking the horn, but I was curious to hear the siren again, as if it could lead me to something that scared me. It felt like I was being pulled in 2 directions. The night was falling and the moon was peeking out from behind a thin layer. The grass and clouds lit up in the faint light. The wind was gentler tonight, so I could hear every little sound more clearly. My own footsteps on the ground. Around midnight the siren started softly again. At first I stepped out of the tent, camera in hand, not sure if I would regret. I heard my heart pounding. The siren got closer, the tone changed, almost beckoning. I walked towards it, feeling anxiety spike with each step. That's when I saw the hooded figure again. This time it appeared near the rocks on the opposite side of my camp. It was dark, the shape blended in with the darkness. The whistle sounded from its direction, but the figure itself did not move its arms or head. It stood still. I raised my camera and took a few pictures. The flashlight shone on the rocks. My eyes struggled to adjust in the afterlight, and for a moment I could not see the figure anymore. Then I saw it again on the far side of the rocks. I was sure it had changed position. Without making a sound, my stomach felt empty, my throat tightened. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The whistle was still echoing steadily in my skull. I walked closer, step by step. My body felt tense, my legs stiffened. When I got to where there was no one, I turned back to scan the field. That was when I realized the whistle was now behind me. I turned back, panting. The figure stood on the horizon, outlined by the moonlight. It was just a hooded figure looking towards me. I took another picture, but the light flash is useless at that distance. I lower the camera and stare at it. The siren still fills the air, then it stops. The silence becomes heavy. I wait for something else, but it stays silence. A few seconds later a light breeze blows back, shaking the grass. The silhouette still stands still, as if waiting. I don't know if I should approach a hiding place. My head is buzzing with adrenaline, my ears are pounding. I'm scared, but also strangely drawn. After a few moments I force myself to back away. I don't turn away from it until I get close to the tent. Inside the tent I zip it up and sit in the dark for a long time, shivering. I can't sleep. The siren doesn't return for the rest of the night, but I feel its presence like an invisible thread between me and the silhouette on the horizon. In the morning I decided I needed to leave. I had enough photos and I didn't want to tempt that force anymore. I packed my things as fast as I could. The day was bright and hot and I felt sweat dripping down my back. I kept looking over half my shoulder, expecting to see a hooded figure standing in broad daylight, but nothing appeared. I threw the tent in the trunk and slammed it shut. My hands were still shaking as I started the car. I drove off, checking the rearview mirror constantly. The fields stretched out behind me, empty and silent in the sun. I felt a sense of relief as I approached the main road. Even now remembering those nights makes my skin crawl. The siren felt alive, as if it was looking for me. I couldn't tell if it wanted to harm me or lure me into something beyond my understanding. I just had it more than once. I have the photos to prove it, although they are blurry and barely show the silhouette. As grave digging night, 9:30 at night, not a soul passing by. Sit against the banyan tree along the dark village road, Kwong felt impatient as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He had never seen time pass so slowly. Feeling restless, his face unable to hide the tension, Kwong fumbled to pull out a crumpled cigarette pack, took out a cigarette and put it to his lips. The lighter had just been lit, revealing his flushed face and the half-drunk bottle of wine beside him. He took continuous puffs, exhaling smoke with a long sigh. The wind blew in gusts, a few zigzag lightning bolts flashed as if wanting to tear the dark sky apart. There's going to be a storm. All the better. He muttered softly. After tonight, everything would change completely. He would have money to pay off his gambling-addicted father's debt, and money to repair the dilapidated house. And more importantly, he would have money to ask for Lan's hand in marriage, the most beautiful girl in the village whom he had loved for a long time. Dem Dao Mo. Many times he had visited Lan's house and expressed his desire to get married, but her parents always looked down on him, and many times even hinted in front of Kwong. When a daughter gets married, she must choose someone with good economic conditions to reduce her suffering in the future. Don't be blind, marry someone without a stable job, a poor vagabond, what will you have to live on? Then you'll sit around cursing and insulting each other all day, it will be too late to regret it, my child. The voice of Mrs. Hugh, his lover's mother, still haunted his mind. My husband and I only have one daughter. After more than 20 years of raising her, she is so beautiful, so I don't want my child to suffer in the future. If you have a stable job, a decent family, we won't forbid anything because we know you also truly love Lan. But, well, think about your family situation. You're 30 years old, what do you have? At first, he felt sad and hurt, but after thinking about it, what she said was right. Born at a disadvantage compared to others, his mother died early, his father was bored and threw himself into drinking and gambling, thinking that it was just a temporary moment to relieve his sadness, but unexpectedly, it got deeper and deeper, making his already poor family even more deprived. No matter how much money he made, he had to worry about paying off his gambling debts and debts to his father. While his friends, who were his age, had enough to eat and save, thinking about his fate, he was always wandering and struggling, not knowing when he would have a chance to change his life. Kwong glanced at his lover, saw her head down, looking embarrassed and awkward. He said to Mrs. Hugh, with a firm attitude, I promise you, by the end of this year, I will have a stable job and move out to live on my own. I will have enough money to take care of Lan, please believe in me. Quickly waving her hand to interrupt, her voice became louder. Stop, stop. I always see you promise, we'll do this, we'll do that. But then I don't know when you will be able to do it. People with money don't need to promise, others still believe. People with nothing only know how to promise all day long. As she spoke, she stood up and went into the room. From now on, I hope you will let my daughter go. From now on, find someone who is suitable for your situation. Stop daydreaming, moldy chopsticks can't fit a red tray. Please come back. Although Lan loved Kwong, she listened to her mother whispering every day, and gradually she became more accepting. Looking at her close friends, those who married rich men all seemed happy, eating well and dressing well. Those who married poor men looked miserable, selling things on the street, worrying about making ends meet. Seeing the truth before her eyes, she hesitated even more about her love life. If you are poor, happiness will never last long. Remember that. Her mother advised. Lan began to hesitate, half wanting to break up, half wanting to give Kwong more time. If he still couldn't build a career, she would marry Tang. A guy with a bright future, the son of the vice chairman of the commune, the person her parents had chosen. And more importantly, Tang had also had his eye on her for a long time. Although he was ugly, she might not love him now, but after their married life together, who knows, things might change. That night, seeing Kwong off to the village road, she hesitantly said, Please take time to take care of your work. We shouldn't see each other so much. seeing that her lover's way of speaking seemed cold and distant. Kwong quickly grabbed her hand and said angrily, "Hey, what's with your attitude? What did you promise me before? Didn't you say that no matter what the circumstances were, you still wanted to be my wife?" Confused, she removed Kwong's hand and explained angrily, her voice filled with resentment and bitterness. "That's true, but you have to be a little more realistic. We've been in love for 3 years, I've waited for you to have a stable job, but when? When? Answer me." Kwong stammered and lowered his head slightly. With tears in his eyes, Lon continued. "The house is dilapidated and lacking. Your father gambles all day long, and when he's not gambling, he drinks, causes trouble, and curses. I think about you, but you also have to think about my life. Grave digging night. 9:30 at night, not a soul passing by. Sit against the banyan tree along the dark village road." Kwong felt impatient as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He had never seen time pass so slowly. Feeling restless, his face unable to hide the tension, Kwong fumbled to pull out a crumpled cigarette pack, took out a cigarette and put it to his lips. The lighter had just been lit, revealing his flushed face and the half-drunk bottle of wine beside him. He took continuous puffs, exhaling smoke with a long sigh. The wind blew in gusts, a few zigzag lightning bolts flashed as if wanting to tear the dark sky apart. "There's going to be a storm. All the better," he muttered softly. After tonight, everything would change completely. He would have money to pay off his gambling-addicted father's debt, and money to repair the dilapidated house. And more importantly, he would have money to ask for Lan's hand in marriage, the most beautiful girl in the village whom he had loved for a long time. Dem Dao Mo. Many times he had visited Lan's house and expressed his desire to get married, but her parents always looked down on him, and many times even hinted in front of Kwong. When a daughter gets married, she must choose someone with good economic conditions to reduce her suffering in the future. Don't be blind, marry someone without a stable job, a poor vagabond. What will you have to live on? Then you'll sit around cursing and insulting each other all day. It will be too late to regret it, my child. The voice of Mrs. Hugh, his lover's mother, still haunted his mind. My husband and I only have one daughter. After more than 20 years of raising her, she is so beautiful, so I don't want my child to suffer in the future. If you have a stable job, a decent family, we won't forbid anything because we know you also truly love Lon. But, well, think about your family situation. You're 30 years old, what do you have? At first, he felt sad and hurt, but after thinking about it, what she said was right. Born at a disadvantage compared to others, his mother died early, his father was bored and threw himself into drinking and gambling, thinking that it was just a temporary moment to relieve his sadness, but unexpectedly, it got deeper and deeper, making his already poor family even more deprived. No matter how much money he made, he had to worry about paying off his gambling debts and debts to his father. While his friends, who were his age, had enough to eat and save, thinking about his fate, he was always wandering and struggling, not knowing when he would have a chance to change his life. Kwong glanced at his lover, saw her head down, looking embarrassed and awkward. He said to Mrs. Hugh, with a firm attitude, "I promise you, by the end of this year, I will have a stable job and move out to live on my own. I will have enough money to take care of Lon, please believe in me." Quickly waving her hand to interrupt, her voice became louder. "Stop, stop. I always see you promise, we'll do this, we'll do that. But then I don't know when you will be able to do it. People with money don't need to promise, others still believe. People with nothing only know how to promise all day long." As she spoke, she stood up and went into the room. "From now on, I hope you will let my daughter go. From now on, find someone who is suitable for your situation. Stop daydreaming, moldy chopsticks can't fit a red tray. Please come back." Although Lon loved Kwong, she listened to her mother whispering every day, and gradually she became more accepting. Looking at her close friends, those who married rich men all seemed happy, eating well and dressing well. Those who married poor men looked miserable, selling things on the street, worrying about making ends meet. Seeing the truth before her eyes, she hesitated even more about her love life. If you are poor, happiness will never last long. Remember that. Her mother advised. Lan began to hesitate, half wanting to break up, half wanting to give Kwon more time. If he still couldn't build a career, she would marry Tang. A guy with a bright future, the son of the vice chairman of the commune, the person her parents had chosen. And more importantly, Tang had also had his eye on her for a long time. Although he was ugly, she might not love him now, but after their married life together, who knows, things might change. That night, seeing Kwon off to the village road, she hesitantly said, "Please take time to take care of your work. We shouldn't see each other so much." Seeing that her lover's way of speaking seemed cold and distant, Kwon quickly grabbed her hand and said angrily, "Hey, what's with your attitude? What did you promise me before? Didn't you say that no matter what the circumstances were, you still wanted to be my wife?" Confused, she removed Kwon's hand and explained angrily, her voice filled with resentment and bitterness. "That's true, but you have to be a little more realistic. We've been in love for 3 years, I've waited for you to have a stable job, but when? When? Answer me." Kwon stammered and lowered his head slightly. With tears in his eyes, Lan continued. "The house is dilapidated and lacking. Your father gambles all day long, and when he's not gambling, he drinks, causes trouble, and curses. I think about you, but you also have to think about my life. Grave digging night. 9:30 at night, not a soul passing by. Sit against the banyan tree along the dark village road." Kwon felt impatient as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He had never seen time pass so slowly. Feeling restless, his face unable to hide the tension, Kwon fumbled to pull out a crumpled cigarette pack, took out a cigarette and put it to his lips. The lighter had just been lit, revealing his flushed face and the half-drunk bottle of wine beside him. He took continuous puffs, exhaling smoke with a long sigh. The wind blew in gusts, a few zigzag lightning bolts flashed as if wanting to tear the dark sky apart. "There's going to be a storm. All the better," he muttered softly. After tonight, everything would change completely. He would have money to pay off his gambling-addicted father's debt, and money to repair the dilapidated house. And more importantly, he would have money to ask for Lan's hand in marriage, the most beautiful girl in the village whom he had loved for a long time. Dem Dao Mo. Many times he had visited Lan's house and expressed his desire to get married, but her parents always looked down on him, and many times even hinted in front of Kwon. When a daughter gets married, she must choose someone with good economic conditions to reduce her suffering in the future. Don't be blind, marry someone without a stable job, a poor vagabond. What will you have to live on? Then you'll sit around cursing and insulting each other all day. It will be too late to regret it, my child. The voice of Mrs. Hugh, his lover's mother, still haunted his mind. My husband and I only have one daughter. After more than 20 years of raising her, she is so beautiful, so I don't want my child to suffer in the future. If you have a stable job, a decent family, we won't forbid anything because we know you also truly love Lan. But, well, think about your family situation. You're 30 years old, what do you have? At first, he felt sad and hurt, but after thinking about it, what she said was right. Born at a disadvantage compared to others, his mother died early, his father was bored and threw himself into drinking and gambling, thinking that it was just a temporary moment to relieve his sadness, but unexpectedly, it got deeper and deeper, making his already poor family even more deprived. No matter how much money he made, he had to worry about paying off his gambling debts and debts to his father. While his friends, who were his age, had enough to eat and save, thinking about his fate, he was always wandering and struggling, not knowing when he would have a chance to change his life. Kwong glanced at his lover, saw her head down, looking embarrassed and awkward. He said to Mrs. Hu, with a firm attitude. I promise you, by the end of this year, I will have a stable job and move out to live on my own. I will have enough money to take care of Lan, please believe in me. Quickly waving her hand to interrupt, her voice became louder. Stop, stop. I always see you promise, we'll do this, we'll do that. But then I don't know when you will be able to do it. People with money don't need to promise, others still believe. People with nothing only know how to promise all day long. As she spoke, she stood up and went into the room. From now on, I hope you will let my daughter go. From now on, find someone who is suitable for your situation. Stop daydreaming, moldy chopsticks can't fit a red tray. Please come back. Although Lan loved Kwong, she listened to her mother whispering every day, and gradually she became more accepting. Looking at her close friends, those who married rich men all seemed happy, eating well and dressing well. Those who married poor men looked miserable, selling things on the street, worrying about making ends meet. Seeing the truth before her eyes, she hesitated even more about her love life. If you are poor, happiness will never last long. Remember that. Her mother advised. Lan began to hesitate, half wanting to break up, half wanting to give Kwong more time. If he still couldn't build a career, she would marry Tang. A guy with a bright future, the son of the vice chairman of the commune, the person her parents had chosen. And more importantly, Tang had also had his eye on her for a long time. Although he was ugly, she might not love him now, but after their married life together, who knows, things might change. That night, seeing Kwong off to the village road, she hesitantly said. Please take time to take care of your work. We shouldn't see each other so much. Seeing that her lover's way of speaking seemed cold and distant, Kwong quickly grabbed her hand and said angrily. Hey, what's with your attitude? What did you promise me before? Didn't you say that no matter what the circumstances were, you still wanted to be my wife? Confused, she removed Kwong's hand and explained angrily, her voice filled with resentment and bitterness. That's true, but you have to be a little more realistic. We've been in love for 3 years, I've waited for you to have a stable job, but when? When? Answer me. Kwong stammered and lowered his head slightly. With tears in his eyes, Lan continued. The house is dilapidated and lacking. Your father gambles all day long, and when he's not gambling, he drinks, causes trouble, and curses. I think about you, but you also have to think about my life. Up until now, ghost stories had not bothered Kwong much, because he had never seen them before anyway. Death is the end. He thought to himself. If digging up a dead body was scary, being discovered by others was even scarier. Although he gave himself 2 choices, one was to have everything to change his life, the other was to lose everything, but this was no joke, at least he would be beaten by his family, at worst he would go to jail for at least a few years, that was what worried him the most, so he had to be very careful when acting. He couldn't let anyone see or suspect. Kwong, why are you sitting here? While he was lost in thought, Kwong was startled, his eyes widened. Trong was standing in front of him, holding a bright flashlight. Kwong was both surprised and annoyed by his untimely appearance. Although both of their jobs involved the dead, unlike the funeral procession team like Kwong, Trong was a professional grave builder in the village. They had known each other since childhood, but he didn't like Trong's personality. Kwong answered curtly, shaking the bottle of wine in his hand. Drinking wine. Can't you see? Trong burst out laughing. He sat down across from Kwong, holding the bottle of wine and looking at it, saying. Drinking wine here? Alone in the middle of a stormy night like this? Do you think I believe it? Kwong grabbed the bottle, his attitude fierce. Fuck me, what I do has nothing to do with you. Hey, why are you so hot-tempered, my friend? I was just asking. There must be some business, right? As soon as he discovered Kwong sitting here, Trong quickly sensed something. Although it was not clear, Kwang's attitude and the sack hidden behind the banyan tree under the flashlight helped him realize many unusual things. Seeing that Kwang did not say anything, he probed. "Is there anything I can do? There is not much work these days, I can't earn much. My wife is about to give birth, so I need money." Hearing Trong speak, Kwang thought for a moment, intending to invite him to join. After all, the two of them would work faster. But if so, he would have to split the gold in half, which he never wanted. Kwang's attitude softened. Anyway, he had to be gentle to find a way to get rid of him soon. He took a deep drag of his cigarette, speaking through the smoke. "Yeah, but not now. In a few days, if there is anything, I will call you." "That's great." Trong's eyes lit up, but he was still suspicious. He asked. "But tonight, do you need me to help you with anything? Must be important." Hearing Trong's question, Kwang suddenly jumped, confused. He laughed and changed the subject. No. No. What the hell? Today I encountered many annoying things. I was sad, so I came here to sit and drink wine." Seeing Trong nod, Kwang showed concern. "By the way, your wife is pregnant, who knows when she will go into labor, and the storm is about to start. Go home and take care of her, I'll call you in a few days. I'm about to do big business in the district town, I'll have a lot of work for you. Oh, remember that. If you need anything, just tell me, I'm free these days." Trong smiled happily, but his eyes still glanced at Kwang's sack. He stood up. "That's it, I have to go home." Kwang replied. "Yeah, I'm going home too. A big storm is about to start." Looking at Trong's clumsy figure holding a flashlight walking home, Kwang sighed, muttering a few curses even though he felt much lighter inside. He tilted his head back and took a long gulp. The alcohol quickly seeped into every muscle, making his body feel excited and hot, erasing the vague fear that had just begun to flicker. His mind felt a little lightheaded and excited. The large sack was placed under the banyan tree. Inside were a shovel, a crowbar, a hammer, a few nails and a flashlight. A small knife was tucked into his waist. That was enough for him to do his job. His years as a construction worker had given him a lot of experience. He carefully picked up the sack and stood up. His shadow was vague in the vast darkness that was covering the dirt road leading to the field, or as the villagers called it, the path to the cemetery, where Mr. Hai had been buried a few days ago. During the day it was already deserted, at night it was even more gloomy, desolate and cold to the point of being creepy. "I have to hurry, I have to finish before dawn," he told himself and walked faster with the strong wind blowing back, his old sneakers blending with the rustling sound of the grass on both sides of the road. In the sky, a few streaks of lightning still flashed, intertwining, revealing the shadows of a few graves, faintly appearing and disappearing ahead. Suddenly Kwang stopped. There was a sound like footsteps coming from behind. An uneasy feeling suddenly appeared in his head, as if someone was following. Kwang stood still, turned his head around. Behind him was only a long dirt road, a few ancient trees spreading their leaves in the wind like waving arms. The sound of frogs croaking from the fields echoed, sounding nauseous, ghostly and creepy in the quiet night. "Who dares to come out here at this hour?" he muttered and ran into the cemetery. The hazy mist covered hundreds of large and small graves, old and new, lying intertwined in long rows, stretching along the entire path. The deeper we went, the colder and gloomier the air became. It was not difficult to find Mr. Hai's grave among dozens of other graves surrounding it. He himself had come here with the funeral team to witness his burial. It looked like a high mound of earth, covered with a few wilted wreaths, and weeds had just begun to sprout. He sat down, staring at Mr. Hai's portrait printed on the tombstone that still smelled of cement. A 70-year-old man with a wide forehead, a big nose, and a thick layer of fat under his chin. The most impressive feature on his face was probably his fierce eyes, always staring deeply into the hearts of the people opposite. Under the rumbling lightning, Kwong felt that Mr. Hai was staring at him as if he were still alive, making him stand up awkwardly, not daring to look into those fierce eyes any further. The graves here were all 1 meter 8 deep, 2 meters 8 long and 1 meter 3 wide. With his strength and experience, it would take at least a few hours to dig them. So it had to be finished before 4 o'clock in the morning. Holding the shovel in his hand, he reflexively looked around the cemetery. The wind was still blowing, making it sound like someone was crying and lamenting. Gritting his teeth, he dug the shovel deep into the grave. Before he could scoop it up, he suddenly stopped, his intuition telling him that someone was around. The second time he had such an uneasy feeling, he couldn't be subjective. He stood still, holding his breath, looking around. All around were only cold graves, undulating in different heights. His eyes narrowed, he slowly and carefully observed and immediately discovered a black shadow looming, moving on the back of the grave next to him, looking towards him. Then suddenly, from that direction, a scream rang out, "Mio!" Kwong suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, a stray cat. He picked up a brick and threw it hard, causing the cat to growl and angrily leave. "It's really a grave cat," he muttered and cursed. People were afraid when they saw a black cat twice as big as a domestic cat, often foraging in cemeteries, but for Kwong, perhaps it was just a wild animal, not enough to bother him. In the deserted, cold cemetery, there was only one person's shadow. His hands were stiff, full of veins, quickly scooping up shovelfuls of dirt and throwing them to the side. The alcohol as well as the gold under this grave urged him more than ever. It was unclear how many hours had passed, his body was soaked with water because the rain was pouring down heavier and heavier. He stopped to wipe the sweat that was running down his forehead, he was panting from exhaustion, his clothes were already covered in mud. Feeling his eyes were getting blurry, Kwong sat down, shaking his head vigorously a few times, making a cracking sound. The scenery around him was still dark and hazy, accompanied by gusts of wind blowing like the sound of a ghost lamenting and calling out to people from deep underground. Kwong looked up at the sky, he was already in a rectangular hole. The hazy mist covered hundreds of large and small graves, old and new, lying intertwined in long rows, stretching along the entire path. The deeper we went, the colder and gloomier the air became. It was not difficult to find Mr. Hai's grave among dozens of other graves surrounding it. He himself had come here with the funeral team to witness his burial. It looked like a high mound of earth, covered with a few wilted wreaths, and weeds had just begun to sprout. He sat down, staring at Mr. Hai's portrait printed on the tombstone that still smelled of cement. A 70-year-old man with a wide forehead, a big nose, and a thick layer of fat under his chin. The most impressive feature on his face was probably his fierce eyes, always staring deeply into the hearts of the people opposite. Under the rumbling lightning, Kwong felt that Mr. Hai was staring at him as if he were still alive, making him stand up awkwardly, not daring to look into those fierce eyes any further. The graves here were all 1 meter 8 deep, 2 meters 8 long and 1 meter 3 wide. With his strength and experience, it would take at least a few hours to dig them. So it had to be finished before 4 o'clock in the morning. Holding the shovel in his hand, he reflexively looked around the cemetery. The wind was still blowing, making it sound like someone was crying and lamenting. Gritting his teeth, he dug the shovel deep into the grave. Before he could scoop it up, he suddenly stopped, his intuition telling him that someone was around. The second time he had such an uneasy feeling, he couldn't be subjective. He stood still, holding his breath, looking around. All around were only cold graves, undulating in different heights. His eyes narrowed, he slowly and carefully observed and immediately discovered a black shadow looming, moving on the back of the grave next to him, looking towards him. Then suddenly, from that direction, a scream rang out, "Mio!" Kwong suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, a stray cat. He picked up a brick and threw it hard, causing the cat to growl and angrily leave. "It's really a grave cat," he muttered and cursed. People were afraid when they saw a black cat twice as big as a domestic cat, often foraging in cemeteries, but for Kwong, perhaps it was just a wild animal, not enough to bother him. In the deserted, cold cemetery, there was only one person's shadow. His hands were stiff, full of veins, quickly scooping up shovelfuls of dirt and throwing them to the side. The alcohol as well as the gold under this grave urged him more than ever. It was unclear how many hours had passed, his body was soaked with water because the rain was pouring down heavier and heavier. He stopped to wipe the sweat that was running down his forehead, he was panting from exhaustion, his clothes were already covered in mud. Feeling his eyes were getting blurry, Kwong sat down, shaking his head vigorously a few times, making a cracking sound. The scenery around him was still dark and hazy, accompanied by gusts of wind blowing like the sound of a ghost lamenting and calling out to people from deep underground. Kwong looked up at the sky, he was already in a rectangular hole. Kwong muttered. "Just tomorrow, my life will change, I will have money, a lot of money." Forgetting the stench of the corpse, he took off the cloth wrapped around his mouth and used his teeth to bite the flashlight. He picked up Mr. Hai's cold, stiff, gray hand and looked at it. The swollen fingers made the ring stick even tighter to the bone, making Kwong struggle to pull it out. The more he tried to use force, the more the skin on the dead man's hand peeled off, piece by piece. Squeak, squeak. Squeak, squeak. Suddenly, Kwong jumped in surprise because the owls were flying up, flapping their wings in a panic, seeming to be afraid. Before he could regain his composure, he dropped the flashlight in panic when he discovered a pair of bright eyes staring at him from inside the coffin. Kwong gasped in horror. What is that?" His face pale as he looked towards those red eyes, his hand tremblingly groping for the flashlight. But before he could pick it up, he screamed out loud when a black shadow suddenly rushed towards his face. The cat was like a miniature black panther, howling angrily and scratching, causing blood to flow down his face, making him ache. It was the first time he encountered such a large lynx. Kwong struggled to resist, until he grabbed the ferocious animal's neck, he had to use all his strength to throw it to the ground a few times. The claws sharper than a knife blade dug into Kwong's arm as if wanting to tear his skin into pieces. He gritted his teeth and squeezed tightly. Its growls gradually became smaller, giving way to Kwong's curses. Breathing heavily and intermittently from exhaustion, he used both hands to throw the large, heavy animal onto the edge of the hole, but without using up all his strength, it fell into the coffin, struggled for a while before finally lying still. Its bright eyes gradually darkened like a candle blown out by the wind and blended into the dark night. Despite the burning blood, Kwong groped over Mr. Hai's corpse, he ripped the gold necklace off his neck and happily crumpled it into his pocket. Thunder and lightning began to rumble violently, the whole night was lit up by giant centipede-shaped lightning bolts crawling across the sky. Kwong only had time to look up and quickly grabbed Mr. Hai's hand to remove the remaining ring. But the ring stuck tightly and refused to come off. With no other choice, Kwong reached into his back pocket to find a tie knife, forcing him to dislodge Mr. Hai's hand to retrieve the ring. He placed the dead man's cold, gray hand on the mouth of the coffin, and began to cut it one by one, creating a screeching sound of metal rubbing against bone. Mr. Hai's finger was about to fall off, the piece of skin stuck to it, making it dangle and about to fall. Suddenly, Kwong jumped when the black cat started to wiggle awake, it screamed and jumped out. Mr. Hai's body began to move, his fingers twitched, slowly spreading out in Kwong's hand. He held his breath in fear, the knife fell to the ground, his whole body was cold, his face pale and bloodless, his body trembling as he gradually retreated. But before he could run away, the corpse sat up in the coffin, Mr. Hai's cold hand grabbed his wrist tightly. Immediately after that, a bolt of lightning struck down from the sky, boom. Boom. The rain poured down like a waterfall. Kwong's scream rang out in horror when he saw Mr. Hai's face with cloudy eyes, all white, staring at him with hatred. Let me go, let me go, let me go, I beg you. Kwong was panting as he tried to pull Mr. Hai's hand away from his. He clung to the edge of the hole, swung himself up to escape, but before he could lift one leg, a hand grabbed him tightly and pulled him back. Help, help me, Ghost has entered my intestines. There was a rumbling, growling sound from below, making Kwong too terrified to turn around. He screamed and kicked his legs, his hands clutching the edge of the hole as he climbed up. Boom, boom. Lightning struck down, scattering dirt everywhere. Kwong felt dizzy, his mind spinning wildly, then he fainted. In his dream, he heard a ghostly laugh coming from Mr. Hai's coffin, then a growling voice filled with resentment, accompanied by the thunder and lightning, the rain and wind of a stormy night. Give the gold to me, the gold is mine. The splashing sound in the water woke Kwong up. The water had almost filled the deep hole, a corpse was lying face down floating right behind him. Kwong squinted his eyes and discovered Trong was also there, holding a flashlight and searching. So you've been following me all along. Good job. Kwong thought to himself, his eyes lit up as he thought of a plan to frame Trong. He gently slid down the hole carefully to avoid being discovered. Trong lowered his head, engrossed in shining the flashlight into the hole. He also wanted to take this gold. He searched and said, I knew you had a plan. I just didn't expect you to dare dig up Mr. Hai's grave to take the gold. But now it's all mine. Kwong was startled when he heard Trong's voice. He put his face down in the water. When he saw his friend's hand flailing around searching, Kwong quickly grabbed it tightly and pulled him down. Trong only had time to scream out loud before losing his balance and falling into the deep hole. In a flash, Kwong hurriedly climbed to the edge of the hole, despite Trong's arms and legs flailing around. He planned to stay on the shore, and if he saw Trong come up, Kwong would hold his head down and drown him. But something unusual was happening down in the deep hole. Trong's screams were trying to scream. Ghost, ghost. Save me, there's a ghost, there's a ghost. Trong was struggling, his hands clinging to the edge of the hole, but someone had pulled him down. His hands were still trying to reach up for help, struggling before sinking to the bottom of the grave. Not seeing any more movement, Kwong crawled closer to check. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide open in horror. The grave had now become a deep, murky, foul-smelling water hole that had swallowed Trong. Tomorrow, when they find Trong's body in there, everyone will think that he caused this and died. Just thinking about it, Kwong smiled contentedly. But before he could stand up, he was startled when a large, round human head with the gray skin of a dead person emerged from the water hole, its eyes wide open, looking straight at him. Mr. Hai, no, it can't be, it can't be. Kwong's teeth chattered. He panicked and crawled back, then stood up and ran away. The eerie, shrill laughter echoed, chilling him to the bone, but it gradually became farther and farther away until it blended into the sound of the rain. Kwong's feet staggered as he ran on the village road straight towards Lan's house. Lan dreamily heard the sound of her dog barking and then suddenly howling. Its two paws were scratching fiercely at her door. Knock, 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 knock. Lan woke up with a start. She listened attentively to the knocking on the door, accompanied by someone softly calling her name. Kwong! Lan exclaimed. Is that you? It's me, open the door for me. Hurriedly getting out of bed, but when she reached the door, Lan suddenly hesitated. She asked. What's wrong? Why are you here at this hour? Open the door. Hurry, I have money. Money? What money? Lan was confused and didn't understand what was going on, but she gently lifted the latch. As soon as she saw Kwong, she quickly raised her hand to stop her scream. Why is your face so bloody? It's okay, I'm just slightly injured. We have to escape from here. Hearing her lover speak, Lan stammered. Run away. It's raining and windy like this. I've earned money, we'll go to the district town to make a living. I'll take care of you. But why do we have to go now? I'll explain later. Let's go. While speaking, Kwong grabbed Lan's hand and pulled her away, causing her to panic and pull back. Wait a minute. I suddenly feel worried. There's not much time left. We have to leave before dawn. Kwong hurriedly explained. As if to reinforce his belief, he took out a gold necklace from his pocket and showed it to Lan, then continued. I have money here. We're going to get married. Where did you get this necklace? Don't say I stole it, otherwise. Kwong interrupted. No, it's ours now. Don't worry about anything, let's go. But I'm scared. Let's talk tomorrow. Go home. Starting to feel uncomfortable, Kwong snapped. Are you chasing me away? What did you promise me? This isn't money, what is it? We're going to get married. Kwong rushed to hug his lover and pulled her out. Let me go, let me go. I'm screaming now. Let me go, let me go. While speaking, Lan clung to the door, fumbled for the light switch and turned it on. As soon as the light was on, Kwong angrily dragged her out the door, despite Lan screaming loudly and falling backwards to the ground. The sound of Lan's parents waking up, turning on the light and starting to run to her room. Kwong panicked and ran away for fear of being discovered, he said. I won't let you go, remember that. I'll come back to take you away. The next night in the hospital, sitting by her daughter's bed. As soon as she saw her husband enter, Mrs. Hu cried and said. I don't understand why, out of nowhere, she suddenly went crazy like this. What should I do now? The husband looked at his daughter who was in a coma, her skin was pale, occasionally she was startled, he blamed. It's because you forbade their love affair that this happened. It's all your fault. Mrs. Hu sniffled. It's just because I'm worried about Lan, I want her to get a good husband. Is that wrong? Why are you blaming me now? And how did you go to the police station? Is our family implicated in anything? The husband sighed. Now, the police have investigated. Last night Kwong and Trong went to dig up Mr. Hai's grave to steal the gold. Trong choked to death in a rainwater pit, his wife was still preparing to give birth. Mrs. Hu opened her mouth wide. What about Kwong, have they found him yet? The husband shook his head, his face wrinkled. Poor thing, the police found a gold necklace in his pocket. So where is Kwong now, is he okay? The husband sadly said. Kwong also died last night. A moment later, he continued. He was struck in the head by lightning, his body was floating in Mr. Hai's grave. I feel so sorry and regretful, I just hope he will soon be released, don't come back to haunt my daughter anymore. Mrs. Hu heard her husband finished speaking, covered her face and cried bitterly, both sad and scared. Then it's true, my dear. No wonder my daughter said that last night she dreamed that Kwong appeared and knocked on the door and asked her to follow him. When I turned on the light, I saw Kwong's head cracked in half, blood still flowing down his body. I thought it was just a nightmare, but unexpectedly. Lan was so scared, she was going crazy. Lan was lying in her hospital bed, feeling cold as the wind howled and blew the window open, rushing towards her. She slowly opened her eyes when she saw a figure standing outside the window calling her name. Lan, hey. Come with me, get away from this place. Lan jumped up in panic and saw Kwong right in front of her with his crushed head, his skin ashen, and his icy hand dragging her away. She screamed in terror, her body convulsing, her mind in a state of extreme panic. No, no. Let me go, let me go. The creepy, eerie laughter echoed throughout the night along with Lan's dazed, crazy face.